Here we go, episode 2. This is going to be a good time. This is something that I don't know a ton about, but I am definitely going to be looking to learn a lot more about. Hopefully, you all who are joining, whether it be live or the recorded version, are also looking for some information about this specific topic. We're talking 3D printing. So before I get rolling, as usual, like, comment, subscribe, share, notification bell, retweet. We're live on a couple of the blockchains, both on Odyssey and on Vim TV on the Hive blockchain. So if you see us there, please upvote us. One shout out for Blue Star Union. Dave's not with me right now. I think he's going to check in a couple of minutes. But go to bluestarunion.com, and Dave is a founding member over there. They do tons of work as a nonprofit for civil rights, First Amendment, Second Amendment stuff. Definitely check out what they're doing here in New Jersey, and also looking to branch out into other states doing what they do. So fantastic group. And they have a YouTube channel too. If you just put in Blue Star Union on YouTube, they do some fun, like man on the street, like reporter out on the boardwalk during the Jersey summers and talking to people and stuff like that. So definitely hit them up. So without further ado, I want to bring in our first guest. We have two guests tonight, one returning. This first guest is a brand new guest to the show, which I think is fantastic. And we're going to be talking about some 3D printing. So I am bringing on Sean, who is the 3D print general. How's it going, brother?
Going well, Matt. How yourself?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. I can't complain. I mean, it's summer. You made the comment earlier. Yes, I am without beard now, so got a little hot. I think it was, it was a survival kind of decision that I made there.
Yeah, same here. I actually regret trimming mine off, so I kind of went by steps, and then when I got to here, I was like, oh no, stop.
Yeah, too far. Yeah. So, look, I want to get into this. I always forget this at the beginning, just so people know where they can go to find your information, your content, and stuff like that. How can they get to what you're putting out there?
Yeah, so my main channel is on YouTube, and I go by the 3D Print General there. And all of my other handles are 3D Print General. So on Twitter, it's just 3D Print General, and same with Instagram. I'm on Odyssey as well. I think I actually was trying to get the handle 3D Print, so it's a little weird there. But if you look up 3D Print, I probably will be the first one to come up over there.
Awesome.
Oh, and then also, I forgot to mention, I also have a book on 3D printing, which I'm sure we'll get into. That's on Amazon, called 3D Printing Failures.
Yes, we're definitely going to talk about as much as we can pack into. I mean, we do have 3 hours, so and like I said before I hit the live button, like, you're welcome to stay as long or as little as you want. So I definitely want to kind of talk about, the broader context and how people can kind of get started in this first episode, and that's right in that vein. Before we get talking about that, though, I want to find out, like, how did you get into 3D printing? Was it something where you're just kind of like curious about it, or was there an intent behind it?
Yeah, no, mine's actually a little bit different. I have no engineering background. I went to school for business, which was a little useless. And I was kind of looking for work, and my best friend and stepbrother started a 3D printing service back in 2014. And they needed an inexpensive operations manager, and I was the perfect guy for that. And so I came in, and I really came in with zero knowledge. I was kind of taught as I went, and I slowly realized just kind of how not plug and play these machines are. And they, and somebody without an engineering background like myself, it was kind of like, oh, why is it this way? Why is it this way? And so when I left that company, I was thinking, there's no real all-in-one book. So that's kind of what got me to write that book, was just because I felt like, coming at this from a non-engineering perspective, I might have kind of a different mindset on, something that's intuitive to somebody else wasn't really intuitive to me.
Yeah. And what did you start off printing? Like, was there a specific like product or item that you wanted to print, or was it just kind of like general curiosity?
Yeah, so for the first 2 or 3 years that I was working with 3D printers, I actually didn't have one. I was working for the company that I worked for, had a couple dozen. And so the projects we would do, it kind of ranged. We had a lot of prototype people that were trying to just see what their model looked like. And those would be fairly common. We had a lot of businesses that had small batch orders of something, so they couldn't really justify getting something injection molded. Yeah. And so something like, let's say 300 units. And so, friends, most of our jobs are a little boring. They were electrical enclosures, like how to hold in the electronics for the whatever the person was inventing.
Yep.
And so a lot of times we didn't even know what we were printing. It was just a box made out of ABS. But yeah, ever since I went on my own, I kind of like printing fun stuff. I kind of got out of it the last couple of years, but I'm trying to get back into it. Printing, like right now I have a giant Nefertiti bust that I'm working on right over here. I have a lot of fun doing those, just kind of printing big old things and painting them. Yeah. And now ever since the 3D printed gun movement, that's what I really like making. So
yeah, and that's what I find really interesting about the space is I think what gets a lot of the look in like the Liberty community and stuff like that is the guns aspect of it, yeah. Right? It's like the decentralized, fully 2A aspect of it, but there's also this other probably an even bigger portion of the 3D printing world that is, let's see, like in-person role-playing games. Yeah. It's souvenir pieces. It's printed
D&D
gifts.
And
like D&D stuff. Etsy shops, like tons of people have Etsy shops where they just 3D print things and stuff like that. So, like super interesting space because it's like taking something that I guess wasn't necessarily meant to create these mechanical things like a firearm, and you have a huge cross-section of people, which is fantastic because, not talking too much from like the political standpoint, but like it's like one of those cultural things. Yeah. It's not like in your face that it's like, this is freedom, this is decentralization. It's like, this is a fun time. Come tinker around, make some stuff, What was your very first thing that you were printing was for the business? It was what, some amorphous box or something?
Oh, like the very first thing I printed was actually a bow tie. I remember that specifically. I just, because I used to have a handlebar mustache, and I didn't realize how stupid I looked until I stopped using it. And so I did the handlebar mustache and the bow tie thing, but that was the first thing I printed. But they let me. They were like I said, it was my best friend and my stepbrother that were business partners on this company, and so they were obviously very chill. If there was a spare printer and spare filament, they were fine with me making whatever, because I controlled their social media too. So I, could make fun stuff, and worst case scenario, gets a few likes on the Instagram. So
yes. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, you had the freedom to kind of like tinker around, like play with it. What was the biggest part of the learning curve? Like you had mentioned, if you're not an engineer, I think if anyone expects that they're just going to take the 3D printer out of the box, first of all, you have to assemble it, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that, you really have to dial that thing in. So was that kind of the biggest part of the learning curve right at the beginning for you?
Yeah. And so right now there's, a lot more printer options out there, and they're a lot less expensive. And a lot of these do actually work plug and play for maybe 5 prints, so you unless you pay a lot for a very expensive one. But even then, that was kind of the thing that shocked me, was when you see the advertisements, when these companies come out with a printer, they advertise it like it's magic, and it really, something will break or go wrong within the first 12 prints. I mean, pretty much, if you don't have any idea what you're doing. And so it was really it was just like, every time I print something, it'd be something new. Like I'd be like, oh, what's wrong now? And so that's why I kind of realized there's quite a lot of things that can go wrong, especially with your settings. So it's not just printing on there. You have to actually set your settings on what's called the slicer software. Mm-hmm. And those particular settings make all the difference in your print. And there's hundreds of them. So it was really that's why I have actually a lot of videos going over the settings I use, just because that was such a big deal in a part printing successfully.
Yeah. And so just so people understand, if they're completely green, mm-hmm. What are those settings? It's basically what, the speed?
Yeah, so right? There's quite a lot, and you get into the details of it, but yes, there's speed, and then if you get even more, there's acceleration and that sort of stuff. And then there's the temperature that you're printing at, including the build plate, what the part's printing on, that has to be a specific temperature. Then there's what's called support structures, which are essentially scaffolding for the print. And those settings, you really got to dial in. Otherwise, they break off when you're done. So because you can't print onto nothing in midair. And so in order to do that, you need to have like a little scaffolding come up for it to print onto. And those settings, take a lot to dial in because they need to be able to break off, but not, still leave a clean underside. What other settings? There's, it's kind of, I know I kind of only said like 3, but it's kind of endless with, how many shell walls, how thick the outer edge is, how thick the inside is, which is called infill. It's kind of endless on on how many things you could change.
Yeah, well, I think the good news for anyone who hears that is there's like a pretty robust community that's being developed around the 3D printing. So
yeah, and I don't want to scare anyone away by trying to make it sound like this is really hard. It's not. You can get into it. And especially now where there's an endless amount of YouTube videos. There's my book. There's a bunch of things you can watch, and it's not nearly as complicated as I think it once was, maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah. So I don't want you to crap on anyone, but in terms of like your preferred like 3D printer that you work off of, what's most of the stuff that you're making? What's the one that you're making most of your stuff off of right now?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Right now, I don't think there is a perfect printer to suggest. It's kind of a weird situation we're in right now. There's the printer called the Ender 3 that is the most popular by far. And it's only, I think, $200. You might be able to get it cheaper if you get the original. And so very inexpensive. And it will print PLA, which is the basic material, just fine. And I normally like a little bit of upgrade so I can print more material options and maybe print a little faster. Right now, the best printer for that would be, if you don't want to do any upgrades, is what's called a Prusa, Prusa. The problem is they're about $1,000. So, I mean, we got a big $800 price range there. So what I normally do is buy one of these. Well, I get sent them for review, but I normally buy like the inexpensive $200 to $300 ones, and then maybe spend $150 on the upgrades that I like to do. I feel like within the next year there needs to be more all-in-one inclusive printers that don't need upgrades. But right now it's I would generally suggest to people just getting into the hobby an Ender 3 because it'll print the basic materials and you'll see if you like it. And if you want to upgrade, it's very easy to upgrade. So that's general. But right now, I actually use a discontinued printer, so I don't even know if there's a point of me telling you what it is. But I generally like what's called a Core XY frame, which means the build plate moves down rather than back and forth.
Okay. And
that helps to prevent some failures and ugliness on the print. Generally, I like that. And then I don't want to get too in detail. It's called a direct extruder. So the extruder prints directly into the hot end rather than having a long distance to print into it. So those are 2 basic things that I like my printers to have.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's all good stuff because I think a lot of people are worried that, one, it's a lot of money to get started, which it isn't. And, or I mean, relatively, right? And in fact, I tentatively have Control Pew coming on next week.
Perfect. Yeah.
And he actually has like a 101 course that he's doing, and I think like the starting materials for it max out at like just under $400.
And because the Ender 3 really is perfect for anybody getting into it. I don't want to tell somebody to buy a $1,000 printer and then find out it breaks and they don't like it. The Ender 3 will print PLA, which is the cheapest material, which is probably what Control Pew is talking about, or PLA Plus. And the spools are only around $20, and so a $20 spool can print you probably 5 or 6 Glock lower. So it actually lasts for a little while.
Yeah, and so there's a price point to get into it, right? Like I mean, obviously you can geek out like crazy and go all over the top, but just to like get into it, especially if it's, I mean, like full disclosure, I'm looking to do it because I want to do it myself, but I also want to include my kids in it too. And so there's a price point to get into it where it's not, financially punitive. And then once you're up and running, or once you have like that initial setup, is the substrate basically the main cost, the spools of PLA or ABS or whatever you're using?
Yeah, once you have the printer the way you want it, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, unless something breaks, really, it's just material. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, you want to replace. There's little things you may want to replace here and there, but those are like $5 costs. The nozzle. If you print with the same nozzle for maybe 4 months, you might want to replace it, but it's under $10. So yeah, it's basically just the filament.
Yeah. No, that's good to know. That's like, I think that's also something that a lot of people are concerned about, is that carry cost of it over time, and whether or not they're gonna have to continue to buy parts and things like that.
I mean, stuff does break, so every so often, but that's hard to say when until it does. So
yeah, Teddy basically is on here saying any good file drop will have the preferred settings to print with. So that's also something to understand, is because there's a pretty good community around this, whatever you're looking to print, whether it's firearms or something else, a lot of times, that file that gets put out there it has those kind of like, quote unquote default or optimized settings.
And especially with, I've only printed the one gun, the FGC9. This is the only one that I've printed. And the build guide on that is probably one of the most detailed build guides I've ever seen. They tell you exactly what you need to do. So yes, the settings are right there. The only issue is that that's for PLA. I actually printed my gun in ABS, which is a higher temp material, like what Legos are made out of. And so the print settings wouldn't transfer over. But yes, he does tell you that in that guide. Yeah, the guides are great. So they really do tell you what you need exactly to the detail of every screw, everything. So
yeah, no, that's fantastic, especially if someone is going through it for the first time. They have no clue what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, and I also just so everybody knows, I do not suggest your first print being a gun. I mean, you really should know what you're doing with the machine beforehand. You need to be able to judge what is a good print before you know whether or not your gun is a good print, and you want to make sure it's a good print before you shoot anything out of it. So
yeah, the one thing I've noticed, and this is why I think your book is timely, it's really fantastic, is going through most of the videos, not just yours, but like a bunch of the other creators out there that are putting out 3D printing content. A lot of the videos focus on the trials and tribulations, right? So it's like, the misalignments, the skipped layers or the shifts that happen. Sometimes there's issues in terms of the actual binding of the material together. And so optimizing that is pretty much like, I mean, I understand most people want to just, stick a USB into the 3D printer and then, 20 hours later they have a piece that pops out. This isn't Star Trek yet. Like, we're not there yet,
And honestly, the test files that come with the printer, it may be like that. You may just put in the SD card and click print because they already sliced it for you. Yeah, and that's actually, I mean, I'm not trying to keep up selling my book, but that's why I titled it 3D Printing Failures, because I feel like I said, the marketing with a lot of these printers just make it sound plug and play, and they don't explain the frustrations that may come along with waiting. I can't tell you how many times I'm 20 hours into a 24-hour print and it fails. And that can be very frustrating. And that's why I specifically title failures hey, are you having this failure? Do this. If you're having this failure, do this, in order to, help people.
Yes. Yeah. Let me ask you that a couple of those distinctions. So anyone who's completely brand new, the slicing software is separate from, say, like CAD or some other kind of imaging software where you're actually building the model, right? What does the slicing software do that allows you to take, a digital rendering of a piece that you want to make and turn it into an actual printable piece?
Yeah, and so that's a good question. So basically, there's three things that are unique to 3D printing as compared to like CNC or other machining processes. It's the material options that are available, the extrusion method of actually pushing the filament through a hot end, and the third is the slicing software. So the slicing software, I use Cura. There's a few different ones: Idea Maker, Prusa Slicer. There's paid ones. What you do is you design a file on either a CAD software or Autodesk, through whatever you design your file on. You save it as what's called an STL, which is just a 3D model. So something you could spin in a circle and look at. You bring that into the slicer software. So you see the model in 3-dimensional, but there's nothing to tell the printer. So what the slicing software does is it takes your settings and turns it into what's called G-code. And G-code has been around for a while. It's just a toolpath where, I think it's what CNC uses. It's just telling the extruder, move here, extrude this amount, move here, extrude this amount. And that's what the slicer is doing. It's turning this model with your settings into basically a text file that is read by the printer. And so the printer is just doing exactly what that G code is telling it to do. Move in the X direction here, move in the Y direction here. So that's why the slicing software is really important.
Okay. So tell me, how big of a pain in the ass is treating the actual printing surface? Because a lot of what I've seen, and maybe these are just like outdated things, but there's all kinds of different schools of thought, right? Like some people go with just the standard print plate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Others make slurries of PLA or something like that in order to treat the surface. And then some other folks apply, a whole myriad of other things. Like, does that just have to do with certain prints, or is that just kind of, a
So you mean the
preference?
part sticking to the build plate kind of?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So luckily PLA, which is the most common one, doesn't have too much of an issue with that. So either a standard glass build plate with hairspray, or if your printer comes with some sort of textured build plate, you really don't need to do anything other than heat the build plate to like 55, 60 degrees, which it'll say on the spool. Yep. Other materials are where it gets a little more complicated.
And to clarify, that's in Celsius?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so everything, yeah, I know. Everything is Celsius with 3D printing. So everything you're going to see is Celsius. There are now quite a lot of other build plate options because other materials aren't as easy as PLA. So ABS, so I go over all this exactly why it's happening, but ABS tends to warp and peel off the build plate. And there's, like I said, there's a lot of reasons for it, but you can mitigate it by having a really strong build plate adhesion. And there's, like I said, there's like what's called a PEI build plate. A lot of companies make their own one, but what you're saying is like a slurry, an ABS slurry. It's kind of melting. ABS is, I don't want to get too much into technicals. ABS is soluble in acetone. And so you basically mix ABS and acetone until you get like a slurry, and you can paint that onto your glass build plate, and it'll keep ABS stuck to the build plate. So you kind of, every material requires a bit different strategy. Not everyone, but like nylons are their own unique problem because they are very difficult to get to stick to the build plate. But if you're just printing PLA, you shouldn't have too much of an issue with build plate adhesion.
Okay. And there's even now some of the printers are taking some level of metallic type materials that they can print. Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with every type, but I mean, there's obviously carbon fiber filled, or reinforced materials. I'm not a huge fan of them, just because it seems that the layer adhesion is always not quite as strong as the material by itself. But yeah, I haven't tested too many. There's like the copper fill, which there's a lot of ones that are like filled with a random metal, but it's not strong at all. The actual metal printers, they're actually starting to come out a little bit more consumer priced, but they're still tens of thousands of dollars. But so yeah, right now the filled, I'm not super familiar on most of the other than carbon fiber reinforced materials.
Yeah, that was one of those things where I don't think there's a ton out on it just yet because I guess it's fairly new. Folks are still trying to work with it, and like you said, I think it's pretty temperamental. So I'm not sure it's necessarily the go-to for a lot of people right now, but
yeah, I'm actually currently trying to experiment with higher temp materials. It's annoying, in the 3D printing field, there's patents that were preventing innovation for a very long time. For instance, you couldn't have an actively heated 3D printer so you couldn't, up until I think this year or maybe the end of last year, the patent said it was owned by Stratasys, one of the biggest 3D printing companies, where if you can't even fully enclose your printer. So if most enclosed printers have like little holes and stuff in them, and they can only be passively heated through the build plate. So now printers are starting to come out, or hopefully starting to come out, where you can actively heat the chamber and keep the chamber hot. And that allows for a lot more material types out there, because a lot of materials, their big issue is they require really hot ambient air in order to not warp and delaminate on you.
Yeah, and I think that has to do with what? It's the stress that you're putting the material through, right? Because you're heating it and effectively stretching it, and then the cooling process is where you can end up with a lot of problems, right?
Yeah, so I don't know if you actually saw my video on that. Yeah, I work with a company called Polymaker. They make materials, and they're actually the ones who kind of educated me on this. But yeah, the when you push the material through the nozzle die, you're stretching it out. You're stretching the polymers out. and that's not their normal state. That's a stress state, and so their normal equilibrium state is a little more compact. So as that's happening, it's happening uneven on your print. So some parts are cooling faster than others, and it'll cause either the part to warp up off the bed or the layers to split from one another. This is only for higher temp materials, but and so there's specific ways you can help reduce that. And the best way is a heated chamber, because it keeps the ambient air hot and allows the stress to be released really slowly. So.
Yeah. And are you are you experimenting very much with like building your own chamber around the print area, or have you just pretty much left that up to, say, like the manufacturers to kind of solve? Because this really makes me think of, I'm not sure how old you are, but being someone who's almost 40, I can remember a time period where there was just the boom of, the computer boom was huge. And so a lot of my friends in engineering school, they were all into like, super clocking their computers, like, and trying to get the most amount of processing speed out of, the same hardware that everyone else gets. Is there kind of like that, experimentalist sect within the community that's looking to kind of like
definitely. I mean, definitely. And there's actually a new build-it-yourself printer out called the Voron, Voron. And there's a few different ones, and it's literally build from scratch, get all the components, and it's a really good printer, but you got to, from scratch, build this thing. And so that's actually getting really popular in the community. Myself, I have built a couple printers, but that was my first printer I built from scratch. Just because when I got in, even when I started my channel, it was near impossible to get a printer under $1,000. But now it's kind of, especially, I do get printers for review, so I have a little bit of a unique aspect here. But yeah, I have an enclosed printer that I use a lot for my higher temp materials. I'm actually just ordered on Amazon heaters to put inside to actively heat it myself, because the patent prevented the printer from being able to do that itself. I mean, I haven't, since that first one, I haven't really built one from scratch. But every one of my printers has something upgraded on it, whether or not it's a little tweak or not. But almost every one of my printers, I upgrade something that I don't like on it.
Yeah, no, it definitely has that air to it where, there's innovation coming from, the companies that are producing the actual hardware, but then there's also a ton of innovation that's coming from the individuals that are the first adopters and really kind of like putting these things through their paces, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and what's great is so much of this is open source, and so much of it is the community building on top of stuff. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the innovations that these companies are using are from seeing other people do it. I mean, there's like extruder upgrades that some people test it out in their house, and then a company realized I can mass manufacture this, injection mold it. And a lot of the industry is advanced from just people tinkering around with their own machines.
Yeah. Teddy chiming in saying he's currently building a Voron 2.4. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
So he has about a third of the components on hand.
Yeah. The builds I've seen of it, it really looks like a good machine. I have not gotten into ordering one, but yeah, I really like the way the approach of that printer. It's doing everything that it seems to be. Everybody deep in the community knows what a good printer is, what a good printer needs, and that's why I was saying it's kind of annoying that there's really only one or two companies making an all-in-one printer. That the Voron though is all-in-one. That's everything you need, if you build one of those.
So let me ask you this in terms of kind of like the size of the actual machine and the print area, right? It would seem to me like the print area is good enough for, the reason why it works for, say, like a firearm component or something like that is that's small enough to be feasible within that print area. But you already had Nefertiti or whatever you have.
I don't know how to pronounce it. Nefertiti, Nefertiti.
Yeah. So is that a multi piece or like a multi-component piece that you're putting together? And then how does that work? Do you now have to essentially kind of like manually fuse them together once you put them together?
Yes, so that's a really good question. Ender 3s are limited, I think it's like 230, around 230 millimeters cubed in each direction. So there is a limit on these. I have bigger machines that get closer to 350 millimeters in each direction, but even then, there's a limit. There's a limit to how big a machine can get. There actually is an exception to that. I have what's called a Creality, a CR30. It's a belt printer. So it's kind of unique. It can print something infinitely tall. So it's I don't know if I can get it. I probably can't
So
get it on
it's
camera.
basically like a vertical column, essentially.
No, it's more like a tread. It looks like a treadmill. The build plate
Okay.
is a treadmill, and so it prints at, instead of printing straight down, it prints at an angle, at a 45-degree angle. So it takes some unique settings, but yeah, so it just prints at an angle like this as the belt keeps going, and so the print can essentially be infinitely long. As not really though, but essentially there's no limit to how long you can make something. Or what's cool about that printer is it prints on the belt, and then as it curves around, it'll auto eject the part off the treadmill. So there are some innovations to try to improve upon that, but the majority of printers, yes, you're limited to the build volume. And so this bus right here is actually 3 different parts, and so what I do is I actually I glue them together. So I actually cut them into 3 parts, and so I didn't do a great job. So that's actually the seam right there, and one of the 2 of the parts being connected. Okay. Yeah. So when it's I do a lot of artsy stuff. So if you're doing something mechanical, you probably don't want to do that. If you're doing something mechanical, you're going to want the parts to design together, like thread together, or in some way join together. But yeah, I basically just use, if you're using PLA, that just has super glue connecting the 3 parts together, super glue gel, and and I use some spackle or Bondo to clear the seams. But like I said, I wouldn't really suggest that for a mechanical part. But if you want to print a bust, you can do that.
Yeah. If you, like, obviously you had a hookup because you were in a family business essentially that was doing this kind of thing. But if you had to do it today, if you were completely green, you didn't know what you were doing, where would be like your first 1 or 2 stops for information to start getting going?
Definitely. So speaking of Control Pew, he actually has, if you're specifically, if you want to get into guns too, he has a complete guide to getting started, I think it's called. And so it's like the complete guide to getting started, Control Pew. If you search that, you'll find it. I really think that's a great resource. He goes over step by step. Okay, you want to print a gun? This is what you need to do first. This is what you need to do second. So that is a good step-by-step tutorial. Other than that, obviously my book, but also the YouTube channel. There's a lot of really good YouTube channels. They educated me. Aside from my own, there's Thomas Sandlatterer. It's kind of hard to pronounce. Phenomenal content, taught me a ton. CNC Kitchen, Maker's Muse. There's quite a lot of channels with, basically, if you see them having a few 100,000 subscribers, they probably know what they're talking about. And there's an endless amount of information on YouTube. You don't need it. You can completely ignore my book and get all the information, all the same information on YouTube. It's just more of a one-stop shop resource sort of thing.
Yeah, well, when you're sitting next to the printer, you don't necessarily have to watch, scroll through an entire YouTube video. You can just pull open that desk reference, basically.
That was the goal.
Awesome.
That was the goal.
Yeah, no, I love that. In terms of, all right, so let's start talking about more specifically kind of like the firearm printing aspects of it. So once you get beyond, the tchotchkes and things like that, you're essentially printing, I mean, like, you have what, the piece that you printed is essentially what, 80-90% 3D printed?
Yeah, so I guess you're not supposed to call it 80% because I guess that's a technical term for it. Yeah, I got called out for that. But so basically, it's mostly 3D printed. So the barrel, I'll go into it more. But on this particular printer gun, the barrel is 3D printed and not 3D printed. The bolt is not 3D printed, and then basically all of the springs and screws are not 3D printed. But the rest is essentially 3D printed. You can see in there the ejector's 3D printed. I mean, even the fire control group is 3D printed. So everything inside here is 3D printed, minus those parts. That's what makes this particular gun unique, because it's one that you can make anywhere in the world. You don't need any gun parts. There are no gun parts in that gun. The barrel obviously became a gun part, but they teach you on the build guide how to rifle the barrel in your home. It's a new thing that was only created a couple of years ago, and it's kind of revolutionary. It's called ECM, electrochemical engineering, or electrochemical machining. Mm-hmm. And basically you do it in your bathtub. You take a the metal tube that you're supposed to buy online, and you put in a 3D print with the rifling in it, and you send some salt water through it, and it'll basically, I think, erode it. I'm not exactly sure, to give it the rifling. So the idea behind that gun in particular is that anyone in the world can make it without any gun parts. And that's what really draws me to this field, because that's what's most exciting to me. But there's a completely different side of 3D printed guns where you're just printing the lower, the serialized portion. So there's Glock lowers, AR-15 lowers. There's basically lowers for almost any gun, and but you still need to buy the upper, and which you wouldn't be able to do in Europe because they're regulated parts. But here in America, they're not regulated. They could be shipped to your door. It's not quite as exciting to me personally, just because I could buy a Glock anyway. Like, I don't need to print it. But yeah, no, this is the stuff that really excites me. Because this is only the second generation. I imagine in 5 years from now, it'll be a lot easier they'll keep improving how much easier it is to do. So.
Oh yeah. And, what's funny, you raise an interesting point. Like, you live in Texas, like you're not hurting for,
Exactly.
access to firearms. As someone who lives in New Jersey, or someone else who might live in, a deep blue state that has a more strict kind of, regulatory framework in terms of firearms, that's definitely appealing in terms of, just being able to go with the one component and then essentially order, I'll use air quotes, replacement parts, right? Like, in order to build a fully functioning piece. How worried were you the first time you fired it? Like, did you have reasonable confidence that it was going to work?
I actually did, just because the first time I shot a 3D printed gun was at the Guns and Bitcoin event in April. I have a video on it, and none of those were my guns, and they were all shooting them before me, and so maybe I was too confident, but it was just I kind of wasn't nervous at all, just because I had watched them shoot it a bunch of times, and so I just went in and shouldered it just like everybody else. On my own gun, I was nervous, but I knew my prints were good. I know what a good print is. I know other people are fine. So I still did kind of the, just in case sort of thing. But yeah, I'm going to feel a lot more confident with this one, because, like I said, it's made out of a higher temp material. So I shouldn't have to worry about insane Texas heat or anything like that.
Yeah. So that brings up a good point. So we were talking offline before the program, and I think one of your most recent videos, you were talking about the fact that the environmental conditions did have somewhat of a play or an effect on the functioning of the piece, right?
Yeah, and I'll have to preface with this: I'm the first person I know of to have this particular issue, so I don't want to say, because everybody else prints these guns in PLA plus, or which is just a little bit better version of PLA, but they still they have what's called a glass transition temperature. So when they start to get a little bendy, of 60 degrees Celsius, which I think is like 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And so everybody else, Ivan, all the guys who designed this and are shooting these, they no issues whatsoever with PLA plus. I happened to go to the gun range when it was 110 degrees and the sun was just blistering, and the gun was black, so it's attracting more sunlight.
Sure.
And even though it wasn't 140 degrees, I'm assuming that the tables, the sunlight kind of all got to around 140 degrees. The guns weren't, the other guns we brought were like impossible to hold without gloves. It was that hot.
Oh, wow.
And so on that gun, like any part that had spring pressure on it, like my mag release right here, was just bent all the way up. And same, I'm assuming the fire control group, because there's a bunch of springs in there. Anything that spring pressure started to deform. And like I said, if you're not in a place that gets to 110 degrees, this probably won't be an issue for you. But I want mine to last and maybe even have a few mag dumps without it overheating. So I personally went with ABS, which is, like I was saying, it's a Lego material, but it can withstand like over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So I should be okay.
Yeah. Well, so what's the expected useful life? Like, is it something where there is a number of rounds that everyone expects to go through it, or is it, I mean, can you essentially reprint parts and keep the same functioning piece indefinitely, or is there a useful life on it?
Well, so I forgot to say I feel weird speaking as an expert on this just because I only got into 3D printing guns back in April. I have one, so for when you're talking about lifespan of the gun, it's hard for me to say. But assuming the metal parts that you have are fine, then yeah, you can reprint anything you want, and it's just a matter of swapping it out. Now, how long it lasts? Like I said, I mean, if you follow Ivan on Twitter, I mean, he seems to put hundreds of rounds to it. Jay Stark, who designed it, like I haven't seen somebody showing that after 1,000 rounds it broke on them. So it's hard for me to say. It's also dependent on your print quality. If you didn't print it quite as well, it will obviously break sooner. But people are putting hundreds of rounds through theirs without any issues. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure there is an average lifespan, but I don't want to say like I know.
Yeah. No, that was a big question of mine was, so like, looking at it from that standpoint, it's all right. Well, if you are putting the time and the effort and everything like that in it, is this just something where I think the very first versions that ever came out, again, a lot of people will hang on to, the bad headline. I think the very first versions that came out, only were good for a handful of firings.
Oh
Whereas,
yes, yeah. That was actually what shocked me. So when I started my channel, I had the goal of a 3D printed gun video. Like I wanted to do it, and then I was in California, so that's also a little sketchy to film my face being in California 3D printing guns. But once I moved out to Texas, I started printing a bunch of Liberators, which is that gun you're talking about. That's the one designed by Cody Wilson that started this whole movement back in 2014-ish, I think. And that is a very crummy gun. If you're lucky, it'll shoot once without breaking on you. And it's a single shot that you have to switch out the rounds after every shot. And so when I decided I'm going to make a video, I'm looking at these old gun designs, not realizing it's completely changed. And so, yeah, now these new ones. So printing a Glock lower, I think, I'm not positive, but I think it works the same as a standard Glock lower. It's not, I mean, I've shot one and it didn't really jam on me. So,
yeah, that was the one thing I've noticed is I think and again, I'm speaking from very unintelligible position here, but it seems like that a lot of those kind of like hybrids where you're buying basically all of the combustion chamber type parts, right? You're buying those as if they would normally exist, and then it's just kind of like the housing that you're essentially 3D printing. And so I haven't really seen very much in the terms of like, oh, well, this, 3D printed Glock lower catastrophically failed after, this many rounds.
Oh, and that's what's also great about this group. There's Deterrence Dispense. They, the ones who are making a lot of these gun files, there's a couple groups. They really beta test their stuff. They will not release a file to the public until, I don't know their exact requirements, but a specific amount of beta testers have all put 200 rounds through it without any issues. And so that's why a lot of times these models actually take a while to come out, because they want to make sure it's really put through its courses. So no, these guns, you won't see many catastrophic failures unless the person who is printing it doesn't know how to print a gun. I'm sorry, doesn't know how to print parts and doesn't recognize their part is crummy. So if you follow the instructions, it shouldn't catastrophically fail on you. So.
And Teddy's saying,
oh, there you go.
He had a failure after 300 rounds, but it was basically a layer issue, not catastrophic. New part printed already. So I
there you go. So
it's
literally $4 worth of material to replace any part on there. So if it does break, it's not that expensive to fix. And then also the designers try to factor in if it breaks, not to break in a harmful way. So
do you keep like a journal? Are you like each print? Are you kind of like keeping a journal of what worked, what didn't? I know I'm talking to
that might be a good idea, but no.
YouTube content. So I mean, like, I guess YouTube is kind of your journal, But I would definitely be like, I could see myself being that anal where I was like, all right, just playing with like you said at the beginning of the interview, like, those pieces that can kind of change, like whether it be the diameter of the nozzle, whether it be like the actual temperature and things like that, or
I probably should. At my old work, we used to have in front of every printer we had like a spreadsheet, and if there was a failure, we would have to write the reason for the failure or what happened, and then hopefully over time, if you see a pattern, you can fix it. But no, I actually I don't do any. So I probably should, but no, I don't.
No, I mean, you're basically documenting as you go anyway. So I mean, you could just go back and watch your old videos.
Yeah, and I try to be honest in my videos with my hiccups that I have. I try to show failures when I have them. I don't, only show the good friends.
So you mentioned the basically the Second Amendment, or the Bitcoin and
Bear Arms and Bear Arms and Bitcoin through the Guns and Bitcoin group.
Yeah. So is that and that's not just 3D printed or 3D printers, right? I mean, that is a Pro 2A plus a Pro like crypto combined organization, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think on the Saturday there was a speakers for both Bitcoin and crypto, and then speakers regarding guns, and then 3D printed guns. But luckily on that Sunday it was a gun range event. So there's probably more non 3D printed guns at the gun range, but I was specifically with the guys who brought all their 3D printed guns. So that was I mean, we probably shot 24 3D printed styles of guns. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. So if anybody wants to watch it, I think it's I shoot a bunch of 3D printed guns, do my hand survive, I think is the title.
Yeah. I would definitely advocate watching it, because it was a fun watch. Like it's not it's not one of your more technical videos, which is great, because it's you kind of get to see. Also, I think a lot of people get the misconception that people who are 3D printing are like nerds in the basement who are antisocial and stuff. It's just, it's not that. Like,
or the opposite, where they think people 3D printing guns are terrorists. So it was fun. I specifically wanted to do it not like Vice. That was my goal. I wanted to not be like Vice. I wanted to show it like, hey, we're having a good time. Let's show us having a good time. And yeah, I mean, the guys are some of the nicest guys I've ever met. So it's kind of, it's doesn't really go with the narrative, at least of being terrorists or,
Sure. Yeah. What was your favorite one? There were some wacky ones, like in terms of, not necessarily the functionality, but there were some wacky ones in terms. Well, I don't know. There was the one the backpack Beltfed one.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I was shooting.
So I actually didn't shoot that one, but his name is Suckboy Tony. You can follow him on Twitter. He's really funny. He focuses on fully 3D printed guns. So like even the barrel is 3D printed, and he has a 50 cal that is electrically charged to shoot the gun rather than a normal strike. Yeah, he's working on some really cool things, and yeah, he made a full chest like belt fed. It's not really belt fed. It goes into the magazine port, but it's an endless supply of ammo. And he made it like he wants to make it like a hopper where you just pour in the ammo and it feeds through and goes into the magazine into your gun. And it obviously jammed a few times on him, but it's a really cool concept.
Yeah. So you didn't get to shoot that one, but what was your favorite that you got to play around with?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it probably was just their FGC9. That was the first time I had shot one at that time, because that's the one that has excited me the most. The fact that there's no gun parts on it. So that was the one I was most excited about. There were some really weird ones, though. So I really liked Ivan's creation. There was one of his guns there, which was he turned in. So I'm not a good gun expert. So if I say terms wrong, I'm very new to guns. But he turned a 1911 into a rifle. And it actually shot really well. And then there was a bullpup Glock that Control Pew's been working on, which means that he completely moved where the firing control is on a Glock, and it's really awkward to hold. But it's I don't know. I asked him, why did you make this, and he goes, because people told me I couldn't. So that's a lot of this community too. A lot of them are just like you should see some of the creations. They're just madness, where they just take a revolver and they turn a revolver into a rifle just by like I don't know, just insane stuff. But they're a lot of fun.
To talk kind of like philosophically about the space, right? it's different from the standpoint of, like, say you work for a big company and you're coming up with, it doesn't matter, firearm, a piece of kitchen flatware, whatever you're making, household item, whatever, to like go through that process of like working with the production facility and creating the extrusion mold or whatever, and designing everything, and nowadays sending it to freaking China and having it
Mhm.
come back to you, right? Like, this is right on your desktop,
Yeah.
and literally your imagination is the limit,
Yeah,
right?
and the best part about it is how easy iterations are. So that's one of the biggest problems with getting stuff sent out. They, uh, if something's wrong, it's going to take another 2 months to do a little tweak, or however long it takes for them to make a new prototype for you. This allows you to prototype within a few hours, depending how big the part is. Oh, this part's not fitting right. Okay, I got to go and redesign the hole to make it a little bit bigger. And then you print it in 2 hours and make sure. That's the best part, where the turnaround time on iterations is unheard of, in the manufacturing process. And then the other good thing is small production runs. It's still probably more cost effective for large production runs to do injection molding.
Sure.
But, if you want to print 200 of something, I mean, try getting 200 injection molded parts. It's going to be, you got to order 10,000. And
Well, the actual die, or the form, the mold, that's the bulk of the cost, really. I mean,
exactly,
like,
the
each
tooling, yeah.
individual unit after that is a rounding error, like, yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I was saying, for the old company that I worked for, for one of our best clients, they made these things to control the TV on treadmills or something, and they needed an enclosure for it, and they were in hotels nationwide, but
Yeah.
they just, like, every time they signed a new hotel, they're like, okay, we need 200 of these. It was actually for, I don't remember, it was for a hotel in some way, in the back of the TV, and so they, it didn't really make sense for them to order 10,000 units, but every time they got a new hotel, they ordered 200 more from us. So yeah, I mean, it really makes sense for prototyping, iterations, and then small production units. I mean, you can have a decent business on Etsy selling, a few hundred units, and you're just printing them all. So
Yeah. Is that something you've dipped your toe into, or is you just
Etsy.
like playing around? Yeah, like, selling pieces for yourself, or
So no, I've never done that before. I do every so often do commission work, depending on the job. I normally turn most jobs away, just because a lot of people don't realize what is the right price to charge for this. I mean, because if I get lucky and it works perfectly on the first try and everything was perfect, then yeah, maybe I overcharged you. But if I have like 5 failures and I have headaches, then I undercharge you. So I usually turn away the average random person. But yeah, I do work with some companies, and for instance, I made a 3-foot sword for this Team 17 video game company for their Narita Boy video game. So yeah, every so often I do that, but no, I'm not on Etsy or anything.
yeah. The what's really interesting to me is, like, from the child involvement in the space, is they can it hits so many different levels. So, like, our first episode was on deschooling, so essentially, getting away from centralized public education, right? And when you get a lot of bang for your buck in something that you're, like, involving your child in, or you're getting involved in too, it's obviously you're doing more with less, or the same amount, right? And so from that standpoint, 3D printing gives them the opportunity to, explore entrepreneurship as well, right? So, like, just the thought process that you went through, the kids can go through that thought process too, and be like, okay, well, if it cost me an entire spool of PLA at whatever it is, $23, for PLA plus or whatever, am I making any money? Like, how many do I have to do? What do I price it at? Like, all this other
The
stuff.
thing that a lot of people underprice is their time. Like I said, if this was just click print and it's just auto ejecting and you have it all down pat, then you might be able to charge a little less. But I can't tell you how many projects I did at my old job where it's like, oh my God, the parts aren't fitting together, and it's just like, I have to. This guy's coming at 2:00, and I don't know. So yeah, there can be stress involved, and your stress and time is worth something. So yeah, that's
What did surprise me was there are some functional pieces that you can do in a single print, right? Like, I've seen it mostly with containers, with, like, Loctite containers and things like that, but it does look like there are a handful of things that you can do a single print, and if it's something that nests or locks in place, there is the ability to do that on the machine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's actually a few different ones. There's like little robots that it prints all kind of flattened parts and you fold it all together and then you kind of crack it and then the wheels will spin. So yeah, there are designs like that. And that and actually the 3D printed guns kind of, it proves that there's a lot more you could do with 3D printing if you know how to design it for 3D printing. So, for instance, like nobody thought you could shoot a gun made out of PLA, but if you design it properly, then you can. So it's a matter of if you design something, there's kind of, I don't know who knows what the limit is if you design something properly. So I actually don't have much design experience, but there are some models out there like robots and boxes, like you said, and I see them every so often post on Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's been my son's one thing is like he, knowing that we're going to get into it, looking at the different things that he can make, and he likes the pieces that kind of like once you peel them off the plate, there's some functionality to them, right? They're not just static, and that's what he likes to see is like the fact that there's some motion and it can actually mechanically work right off of,
and
that
I get what you're saying, but you can also there's I think you could build like an RC car. It's in multiple parts. That's the only thing. But and when you're talking about your kid, I kind of I've been in this for so long, I kind of forget the wonder of it all. Like when I first got into it and I printed that bow tie, I was so excited, and it's just like I kind of forget about that. And it probably is a ton of fun for a kid to. Like there was nothing here and now there's something here. It's probably a decent amount of wonderment. So
what's your biggest bugaboo? Like if is it that 24-hour print that in hour 20 fails, or is it something else?
The biggest annoyance, I mean that definitely is frustrating, but though either that or like a really massive clog. If you have a print where the part gets knocked off, and you're sleeping and you don't know what happened, you can end up with a really gunked up hot end where the hot end is just covered in plastic, and those can be a little annoying, and you have to sit there for a few hours trying to torch it off. But either that or I think that it is really annoying. I've had before, forget 24-hour prints, I've had 6-day prints that 5 days in failed. So that's even worse. Those that can be really frustrating, especially if you bought the material and
it surprises me, or maybe it's just we're not there yet, but is there no like failsafe where like you were talking about, if you have like a major backup or clog or something like that, the machine doesn't really come with some kind of emergency stop or something, right?
It doesn't know to stop. I mean, obviously you can manually stop it, but the that's actually funny you say that. I worked with a company called Spaghetti Detective, and they're trying to do just that. It's called Spaghetti because when a print gets knocked off and just prints, it looks like spaghetti's coming out, and so their goal, right now it works. So you can use their software. It uses a camera that you have to aim at the printer, and it will detect if something's wrong and then pause the print or cancel it depending on your settings. And so that exists right now. So but it's an add-on that you have to do. They're trying to actually improve their AI quite a bit so that it can actually manually adjust on the fly. So if it sees something wrong, it can manually adjust your settings to fix it. But it's not quite there yet. But Spaghetti Detective, I think, is the only one I know of that will detect that failure while you're sleeping and then stop the print from continuing.
Yeah, that would be huge, especially because we're talking about such long time frames. Now you can cut down the print time, but increasing the speed essentially comes with some additional hazards to it, right?
There's actually quite a lot. I mean, the same exact part right next to each other could honestly be, one could be 2 hours and one could be 20 hours, depending on the settings, because first of all, there's layer height. So 3D printing is basically like you're hot glue gunning, and then you move up and you hot glue gun again, and then you move up and you hot glue gun again. How high it moves each time will determine how fast your print can finish. Because if your layers are real thick, it'll finish way faster but have less detail. So if you go for a really small layer height, you'll have more detail. literally twice as long for half the layer height. And then one of the other major limiting factors is the infill. So you can print something hollow, depending on the geometry, if it allows for it, you can print something hollow and, versus 100% dense fill. I mean, we're talking the difference, like I said, 2 hours versus 12 hours, just because it uses 10 times the amount of material.
Right. Well, and it also has to do with like, on that hollow piece, you could also do just like a basic support matrix too, as opposed to doing a fully solid piece, right? And then the question becomes how much, right? Like, do you just do a little bit or?
Yeah, exactly. And up until the 3D printed gun movement, I never printed above like what's 50% infill, maybe 70 at the highest. And because it seems to be a little bit overkill, like you don't realize how dense 70% is until you look inside it. You're like, oh, that's actually a decent amount of material. The 3D printing gun guys, they do 99% just to, I guess, make it as strong as humanly possible. Yeah. But yeah, no, to be honest, if you're printing something cosmetic like the bust or anything else, you can get away with 8 or 10% infill. So only 8 or 10% of the inside is actually fill. You just need enough so that the top prints properly. Because if there's nothing to print on, then it'll have trouble. Yeah, finding that right ratio is going to determine how strong your part is, basically.
Yeah. No, that's and again, that has to do with the experience and kind of like dialing stuff in. And I think I passed it over, but I think Teddy basically said that he had done tons of prints before he ever tried anything more complicated.
Yeah.
Printed 2 dozen. What is a Benchy?
Yeah, Benchy. It's also on my shirt right here. So the evolution of 3D printing is what I have on my.
What's the deal with the boat? Like the boat's a thing, right?
That's
like,
the Benchy. It's called a Benchy. So it's kind of became the calibration print. So there actually are reasons for it. Like there's specific things you can look at to know what to tweak. Like if the top of the boat looks like this versus if the side. But it's kind of just become the de facto test print, and so that's why actually this is one of the shirts So it goes from failure to success. The evolution of 3D printing, just like the evolution of man. It's a little tiny boat. I don't know why it became the de facto, but it really is. Everybody prints that as their first print. So
yeah. Is that like where do you get it from? Like if you just Google Benchy, you
probably can find it. But yeah. So the main website. It's really buggy, but it's still the main website everybody uses. It's called Thingiverse, like universe, but Thingiverse.
Yeah.
And thingiverse.com. And that's still probably the largest repository for designs. And yeah, if you type in Benchy there's probably 6 million different iterations of Benchy people have designed. There's a few different, there's My Mini Factory, and Thingiverse is still the biggest one, unfortunately, just because it's got the most models.
This is the one right here, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And so if I put in Benchy,
I think it's BENCHY. But either way, the first one, that's it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. That's awesome. So I love the fact that there's also a culture that goes with it too, because the culture is basically what ends up making it, right? So like that's what ends up creating community that's around the technology, and it's really what ends up creating what that future, whatever it looks like, becomes, right? And it gives you an opportunity to take part in something where you feel like you're a part of it, as opposed to just a bystander, or someone else is calling the shots and you're just stuck with whatever it is, right?
Yeah, and like I said, I love how open source a lot of stuff is, and how tinkering the maker community is. It's very much like I said, every one of my printers is different than the way I bought it. So yeah. It's really fun that's kind of in the community. And then just so people know, I was talking about Thingiverse, but if you're looking for specific files like FGC9 and stuff, that's they run it through the library network, I believe, like Odyssey and does. It's the website is thegatalog.com, TheGatalog.
Yeah, and I think we're probably going to be talking a lot. Like I said, Control P might be on next week.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's his Bible, basically.
Exactly.
But so I want to recommend, or just remind everyone who's tuning in, like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, and if you're watching on any of the blockchains that we're live casting to, make sure to upvote it. Look, Sean. Yeah. you're welcome to stick around as long as you want.
I'll definitely be watching. I'm a big fan of Sal, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, like you can stick in here too if you want. If you
Oh
want to
no,
chat
no,
it
I'm
up here.
gonna. I'm gonna get
Yeah.
in my underwear. So.
Well, I'll pull him in real quick just so you can
Oh.
say hello to him because
Hello.
Sal, Sean's a big fan, by the way.
What's
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
guys? How are you?
Good.
Sal, you need no introduction. I mean, you're obviously not a stranger to this program or the prior iteration, but we've just been nerding out a little bit about 3D printing and whatnot.
Cool.
But are you subscribed to Sean? Do you watch any of Sean's stuff?
I follow his Twitter regularly, and I've got. I actually saw the FGC 9 build, and actually we at 3D Print to Go Burt, we give away his book with some of our orders to some of our more prized customers.
There you go. Awesome.
Look, Sean, thank you. You can chill out if you want. Up to you. But
You can boot me.
Yeah, no, I don't boot anyone. So
Oh,
it's
I'm
up to you
I mean,
until
I'm
you
getting in
run.
my underwear right now, so you should boot me.
Well, look, as long as you're covered up, that's cool.
There you go.
Nudity, I don't know. That might be a little bit too far. But no,
It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Man, have a good one.
You too.
How's it been going, Sal?
What's up? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You've been all over the place, mixing it up. You've had let's see, you had some happy good time with Pete Quinones there for a little while, talking about the Anarchist Handbook. I think.
Yes.
In fact, that is our book club this month. So I've got my copy
Nice.
right here.
Excellent.
Yeah. So we're going through that. So that's gonna be that'll be fun in a couple weeks.
Instant classic.
Yes. Yeah. I love the fact that it's just open source essays and you just put them together and that's a book.
Well, it's funny you say that because I actually have, and I started working on this. I'm releasing a very similar book of a similar style, and I started working on it about a week or two before Malice released the Anarchist Handbook, and I'm like, I had this idea and shit. Like now I'm like second to the trough, but
yeah. Is it the
it's a
same
little
type
bit
of material or?
It's a little bit different. It's called Anti-Politics, and it's all about, it's like essays on agorism and counter-economics, and it's just basically essays from famous anarchists showing why the political solution doesn't work and why agorism and civil disobedience is the preferred choice. So we have essays from Emma Goldman, Frank Chodorov, obviously Sam Konkin, Herb Island, Gandhi, and people that aren't even agorists or libertarians, just all sorts of great stuff. I think people are going to like it.
Yeah, the one thing that I took from it was all of the people in the Anarchist Handbook, as well as all those people that you mentioned, they have all of these pieces that aren't necessarily kind of at war with each other. They all kind of like complement each other in a way that you can kind of piece them together and be like, well, Stirner had some points here and Proudhon had some points here and they fit with Rothbard here. So like it kind of makes sense. And they're all coming from a unique perspective as well, right? Like a different time, different place, everything like
For
that.
sure. And that's what I think is interesting, especially about the way Malice does it, is because, and it's so important because most anarchists, I would say, don't have any, or at least have little conception of the actual history of the anarchist movement, right? So, and I think if they did have a proper understanding of it, they would see how it was sort of rooted in left anarchism. That's why Sam Konkin called agorism left anarchist, because we were sort of the original, like we're sort of the descendants of the original anarchists, the sort of Proudunes and the Benjamin Tuckers of the world, and so on and so forth. So that's another point that I hope to successfully make in Anti-Politics, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you know what? I love the fact that so many people are talking about it now. Like Malice has had that effect, which is fantastic. And I'm certain that when you put that out, like it'll have that additional kind of like, dominoes where people are now having those conversations. Whereas right now we live in binary world, right? Like it's either good or it's bad, or you're left or you're right, and that kind of thing, which is completely stupid thinking. Like it's, you know, you lack a frame of reference, I think, really, that you need in order to kind of be able to critically think about certain situations, you know?
Even that's even true within the libertarian community, right? Like we get very, that's part of the reason why I decided to do this, because so many party anarchists were blocking me and removing me that I was like, I have to get to these people somehow. What way can I do this? And I was like, well, they can't block a book, so
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's what I came up with.
it's also in the vein of, like, you know, if you're not for what I'm for, you're against it. And you're like, no, that's not exactly the way it works. Like, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think, again, that's like another important point here is like, just because we disagree on tactics doesn't mean that we have a different, end goal in mind. So I think people lose sight of that, and like they'll look at other libertarians like the enemy, or they'll like launch personal attacks at people just because they have a different, a slightly different take on strategy or some really other nuanced issue. And it's like, look, if we agree on 9 out of 10 things, we're allies. Like, I don't, whatever the 10th thing is, we can put that to the side. We could worry about that once the politicians are in labor camps.
Yeah, it's the crabs in a bucket, and it's like no one stops to be like, hey, life sucks for all of us. Like, let's figure out how to get out of the freaking bucket, right? Like,
exactly, for real. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, so let's talk about 3D printing. So Sean did an awesome job. I want to do like a 101, right? And this is right up your alley, because this is something that you basically operate a business that's focused on this. How did you really kind of get into 3D printing? Was it originally something that was attached to your, Agorist kind of, viewpoint, or was it something that you were just kind of interested and curious about it?
So I was a libertarian. I was just a regular minarchist, socialist libertarian, and I went to PorcFest in like 2014.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, the Liberator came out in 2013. So like this was still like the big news. Like this is whatever the whole community was like up in arms about the Liberator at this time. And there was a special presentation that was, I think, Cody Wilson was supposed to be there to be giving on the Liberator.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, my friends were like, the people I was with were like smoking weed or playing cards or something. And they were like, yeah, we don't want to go. So I went to this seminar by myself. Cody didn't show up, but he did send one of his friends, Murdoch Pisgotti. And Murdoch is the head of an organization called Come and Take It Texas. Katie. They do great Agorist work. That's a whole topic for another show. But Murdoch he did this wonderful seminar on 3D printing and ghost guns. And I, as you know, I'm from the slave states like you are. I was from up in New Jersey, where you can't even think about owning like a weapon. So here I am thinking like, oh wow, now I have this great workaround, and now I've seen how easy it is. Murdoch showed me how simple it is. Came home from PorcFest that year, immediately got myself. I purchased a FlashForge Creator Pro. Right, get this. This was in 2014, 15, something like that. And I paid like almost $1,500 for this machine.
Yeah.
Which obviously, now it's literally come down the printer to you can buy an Ender 3 for like $300, Ender 3 V2 now. So it's literally 1/5 of the price. So yeah, that's a good machine. I still have it. I need to put some repairs on it, but it's still there. It still works. And yeah, that was sort of my introduction. That's sort of how I got started. That was back in 2015, and then yeah, I sort of was a hobbyist for a while, and eventually I started 3D Printer Go Burr because I saw people were sort of being funneled into these KYC payment platforms where every single libertarian, every agorist who wanted to get a 3D printer had to buy it through Amazon or through Creality's website or something. But in any case, they were using Visa, PayPal, MasterCard, bank, something like that, some KYC payment platform.
So much for anonymity, right?
Exactly. So, anyone who's read the Bitcoin white paper can tell you that we have a fix for this. So I thought, man, if I just start accepting Bitcoin for 3D printers, it'll be great. And guess what? I live off of Bitcoin Cash anyway, so it really works out pretty well. Yeah. And that's what I did.
Yeah. So was there like a guide that you used at the beginning? What was kind of that one or few information sources that you went to? Because just talking with Sean, and maybe you can also kind of like, critique his comments. He was basically saying, as someone who's fairly new to it, some people get into it with the assumption that you just kind of, plug the file into the machine and it spits out the thing on the other end, whereas it can be pretty finicky. So, what was that, Bible that you basically followed at the beginning, or what were your sources of information to really kind of dial it in?
Back then, there really weren't too many. There really weren't too many options out there. There was no guide.controlpew.com to go to. There was nothing like that. So
Yeah.
it was sort of like you have to figure it out on your own. And we did. It was not easy. It definitely took us a number of test runs, but you get the hang of it. It's like anything else. Look, if I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. I promise you.
Yeah.
It's like learning any other technology, right? If I eventually you're going to be like, what is this thing? But eventually you'll get the hang of it,
Yeah. Was your goal something like the Liberator, where it was, as close to 100%, open source produced, or were you also kind of interested in these like, non-serialized, like printed lowers and stuff like that?
Well, back then, see what happened. It was when the Liberator first came out. That was the only game in town for a long time.
Yeah.
And there was like the Patrick R. Washburn or something like that. There was like these sort of odd designs that not too many people. These like weird STL files that not too many people downloaded, but the gun community knew about them. My thing was I was just trying to get a Liberator down, right? When we first got the gun we first got the printer in like 2014, we just wanted to print a successful Liberator.
Yeah.
And eventually we did, but that was our first goal. And then I think it wasn't until like Ivan came out with, he figured out the ECM barrel that was sort of the next big innovation in the 3D printed gun, because now all of a sudden you can rifle the barrel in your kitchen sink. And now the game has changed, because somebody in Europe can print a gun, and there's nothing that they could do about that. So, those were sort of go ahead.
How long did it take you for the first Liberator?
Oh man, geez, a long time. And see, I didn't know it. At the time we were using ABS to print with.
Yeah.
And ABS is, now everybody uses PLA, which is a different type of plastic. But I actually had the chance to ask Ivan. I was like, dude, I use ABS. Why are you guys always talking about PLA? And he's like, because it doesn't warp as much. And I'm like, oh my God, like the first 20 times I printed a Liberator, all I was dealing was with warping, and I was trying to control the temperature. And I was like, damn, if I only switched over to PLA. So don't make that mistake. If anybody's out there listening, start with PLA. PLA Plus is really the way to go. But yeah, we were using ABS, so it took me like a million times to get it down. And I had like the heated bed, because ABS is like, it warps very easily. So you have to try to keep the temperature. You want to keep it hot. So we had the whole thing enclosed, and it took a while, but we did get it down eventually. And we printed a bunch of those.
Yeah, no, that's what I've collected, is that depending on the medium that you're using, you're going to end up with different headaches, right? So it's really kind of this like
exactly.
test repeat process, and trying to find the tolerances and stuff like that. Do you use the printer for anything else? Like, are you someone who creates home items for it or with it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I print all kinds of stuff. I've got right now I've got an Ender 3. I've got an LDW2R resin printer, and I've got the Flash Forge. So I print all kinds of shit. I've got my wallet. I've got a 3D printed TPU wallet that I've used. That's my main wallet. Anything and everything really. I mean, planters. When I was building an aquaponics system, I 3D printed my net cups, which turned out to be super uneconomical, but I just thought it was cool to have a 3D printed aquaponics system. But a lot of this stuff, it's just for fun.
Sure.
But then then there's the real stuff, like the guns and stuff like that. So
yeah,
there's two sides to the sword.
Wait, what's the resin printer like? Is that how does that operate different than say some of the other ones?
That is that's the one I've been using the most recently. That's really my main go-to now, because I think that's sort of where the trend is moving. FDM printing is still, I think, the way to go. You still want to use your basic Ender 3 kind of model. Like that's still, like, if you want to make a gun, that's still the most secure way to do it. But resin printers I think are the future. They're getting better every day, and it's a whole different world. It's a different type of technology. So I could pull out the printers if you want, but it's like, with an FDM printer, you have a basic platform and you have a hot nozzle that plastic filament gets extruded through, and it does the one layer, it rises, does the second layer, and so on and so forth. With a resin printer, you don't go up, right? It's almost like you go down. So you have a bed that lowers, a metal platform that lowers into a bed of photopolymeric resin, which is like cures based on UV light, lowers into a vat of resin. The light will actually shine up on the metal thing and the metal plate and cure the first layer, rises, cures the second layer, and so on and so forth, until you have a finished product. Right now on my pinned tweet on my Twitter profile, you can see the actually, you can see this guy here. That guy, this is a Glock 43 that I printed on an LDW2R. And that's actually my pinned tweet. You can actually see it still hanging from the printer. But as you can see, so this is like a real Glock. Let me just make sure it's clear for safety's sake. But you can see the mag fits in there perfectly.
And that's a Glock factory mag that you're using?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
This is a Glock factory mag, fully loaded, and this is a resin printed frame. So, the parts are, nowadays it's a pain in the ass to find parts and stuff like that, but they're out there if you look hard enough.
And so
there you go.
I'm gonna picture up right now. So that's also interesting. So do you have to use? I mean, you're basically using less support matrix for it. Like, is that the advantage, or?
No, you know what the advantage of is a couple things. Speed, number one. You can obviously you can print a little bit more quickly, and number two is precision. Like, you don't have to worry. There's no worries about warping or anything like that. As you can see, this mag. Let me show you one more time. This mag fits perfectly, man. It's like a glove, and you'd be hard pressed to get that sort of precision on your first try with an FDM printer.
Yeah.
That's literally, it's like a hand in glove.
Yeah, no,
so
it looks beautiful.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no playing around with the print. There's no fiddling with it like you do with an FDM printer. So I like the precision, I like the speed of it, and also these resin printers are getting better and better every day. So, God only knows where we're going to be, in the future. So you might be, I could foresee a sort of printer where, right now, where the platform might be the size of my cell phone, but I could foresee in the future where the platform is much bigger. So now you can print, instead of one Glock frame, you can print, like, let's say, like 10 at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what's the main operating cost for the resin printer? It's the actual resin. Does it come in like a liquid form, or it still comes in kind of like a physical, hard form?
Yeah, no, it's a liquid photopolymeric resin, and they're not expensive. You can get them pretty cheap, but if you're gonna do like a real build, like this is, I just use this to show people. But if I was gonna make a real, or like my carry gun or something like that, you should use it's Soriatec. Soriatec is the name of the resin. I think there's an additive that you can look up on Google, but there's an additive that you mix the Soriatec with. It's a little bit more pricey, Soria Blue, but it's more sturdy, it's more rigid, and there's been stress tests done on it, and it's got some really high torque. Again, there's like videos on YouTube of people testing out the strength and rigidity of it, but it works out really well. So and don't forget, there's it's not just Glock frames out there. People are doing suppressors. I saw one dude on Twitter like a long time ago who did like an entire Evo Scorpion in Soria Blue resin. It was a really cool build. I don't know whatever happened with it, but I heard that he put a bunch of rounds through it and didn't have a problem, which I think is like fantastic,
Yeah.
I mean, if you can resin print a Scorpion, then gun control really truly is dead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I got to be honest, like that's being, like you said, a fellow resident of the Gulag up here in
Right.
New Jersey, you see some of the toys that people get to play around with, and you're like, there's absolutely no reason why, we shouldn't be able to, possess or utilize something like that. And a scorpion is one of those classic things. It's like,
Yeah.
barrel length is pretty much the only thing that kind of knocks it out, really. I mean, there's probably a couple other, minor things, but it's really just kind of barrel length, which, if you think about, is a completely arbitrary reason for knocking something out. But that's one of those toys that a lot of us who are still stuck in the Soviet Socialist Republic of New Jersey
Yeah.
kind of look at and drool when we see people playing around with it.
Dude, I was there. I was there.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I got a Walter PDP here, which is 18 rounds, which is illegal in New Jersey.
Yep.
If you have just your stocks are illegal. I mean, everything's basically illegal in New Jersey. What's the mag limit there? It's like 6 or 8, 10,
yeah,
something. It's something crazy.
It depends on the firearm, but if you have a 10+1, that's pretty much the max. Depending on other firearms, if you have like a shotgun that's magazine fed, I think the limit's 3.
Right. I know. I know. It's just silly. It's silly. It's silly.
And now I don't know if you've been keeping track of it, but our benevolent governor is going after 50 caliber. So that he just kind of decided out of thin air that
arbitrarily picks a boogeyman.
Yeah, and it's just because it makes a big boom. Like, that's what it
is.
Right,
right.
If you look at the statistics, hardly any 50 cals are used in the commission of certain, especially mass shootings and stuff like that. And Sean chiming back in, he said he should have talked about the 3D printing. He says he doesn't like the messy cleanup, but the quality is just on a different level. So, what does the quality look like? Do you have to use reagents in order to clean up from it, or?
Yeah. So he's right, and I didn't even bring that up. He's right. It's cleanup. It can be a little. It can be a little shitty. So everything has to be cleaned up with rubbing alcohol, and during the coronavirus scamdemic, that was sort of hard to come across. So we were paying exorbitant amounts of money for a small bottle of rubbing alcohol, but people use mineral spirits and they've tried all sorts of substitutes, but at the end of the day, you want to go with rubbing alcohol. But that's what you have to use to clean the resin off of everything. You have to wear plastic gloves because you don't want to get this stuff on your hands. It's sort of toxic. And then also when you're done, when this thing is hanging off their platform, it's covered in goo. So you have to clean it up so it's dry and you can handle it. And the way to get that layer of goo off is to sort of use rubbing alcohol. So what I do is I have this little Tupperware thing that I swish it around in, and then actually after you wash everything off with rubbing alcohol, then you have to put it into a UV curing light, which you can get cheap off of the internet. But actually, here in Florida, what's interesting is that here in Florida, the sun is so strong that I could take a Glock frame, stick it outside, and it'll actually cure outdoors without any help from a UV light, which is pretty cool. But the cleanup process is a little messy, and then you have to clean up the printer, and then there's the vat has to be cleaned, and it's definitely cleanup is a process. Sean is 100% right.
Well, it's a trade-off, right? Because if you're doing a standard print using, say, PLA Plus or something, there's also a lot of sanding and cleaning and refinishing that has to happen on a piece, right? You're not just getting the piece off of the printer and then doing some, just pulling pieces off like it's a toy set. I mean, you do have to go through and sand and make sure that all the clearances are good on the piece as well, right?
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of post-processing that takes place that you can do. I mean, sanding, people spray paint them. They put metallic spray paint on them to make them look like real metal guns and stuff. All sorts of stuff. There's vapor baths for ABS printing so you can smooth it out. But it really depends on you and on the quality of the prints and stuff like that. But yeah, you're 100% right. There's all sorts of different post-processing that goes on.
Yeah. What's the community like? I mean, is it, is it pretty, I mean, the sense I get that it's pretty diverse, but I think a lot of people hear 3D printing, especially when it comes to firearms, and immediately they think it's bunch of, white hicks that are trying to create ghost guns that won't be tracked. I mean,
Well, they're not entirely wrong, but there is, you're right. It's a growing community, so it's becoming more and more diverse every day. I'm surprised every day to see how many more people are getting involved. Back in when I first learned about this stuff, there was just a small handful of us, and now there's people everywhere. Yeah, I don't know. Like back in the day, I remember at one of the in New Hampshire. I remember some dude had like one of the original liberators. And this was like some old guy. He was like, I hope he's not listening, but he was like old back then. So he's like, and I'm thinking to myself, man, if this old guy can 3D print a liberator, then I could do it too. And like now, it's like you see all sorts of people. I sell 3D printers to young girls in gun-free zones, and then they send me pictures of stuff that they print, and I'll leave it there. But every sort of person. I'm sending them to families, to people who I don't know because they're using pseudonyms, and so the community is growing every day. It's becoming more and more diverse. But I think that's a result of the increase of gun laws, right? So, Pete, this is a response. The growth in 3D printing is a response to the tyrannical and authoritarian gun laws. Yeah. And I think as it gets more intense, you're going to see more of that. So like, the more shit that they make illegal, the more shit that people are going to start to print. Like if you look at, especially nowadays, like the more recent stuff, like it's hard to even keep up. They're putting out like such great designs every day between like, Deterrence Suspense and Are We Cool Yet is another one. There's just so much stuff coming out every day that it's like the community is just moving at such a rapid pace now. It's like we went from, like I said before, like Liberator to like the ECM barrel was like 3-4 year 5 years, something like that. Yeah. But now it's like every month, every week, we got like a new design coming out. Control Pew or Mr. Snow or Ivan or Vin. Somebody's putting something awesome out, So, and shout out to those guys for putting in the legwork,
One of my favorites to watch is Print Shoot Repeat, because he's like this squeaky voiced kid, and I think he actually tracks the number of voice cracks when he's on the video. But yeah, like, and it's a pretty diverse, like it's more diverse than I think most people would expect. I think the other thing, I mean, we could talk a little bit about like the political ramifications and stuff, but this is something that keeps coming up repeatedly. I know on interviews, that you're doing and people that I'm talking with, is this idea of building culture, right? Like it's building a culture of people that decide to, move away from having to kowtow to some central authority. But the beauty part of 3D printing is it's not just firearms, right? It's like it's little tchotchkes and it's artists and it's is extremely diverse set of people that are converging into this like technological and creative space. And that's like the holy grail. Like that is something, especially if you're in the liberty movement, because you're looking for that medium. The liberty people seeded pop culture a long time ago. And so trying to make headway there is like working uphill. But here you have virgin territory. It's brand new emerging technology. And that's one of those things. Like, do you see that? Like that seems like, not necessarily I would want to call it like a Trojan horse, but like it's an amazing just vehicle to bring this knowledge and this point of view to people.
Yeah, I think it's part of the larger wave of agorism that is going on, and that's really what it comes down to. And no other political ideology that's ever existed has ever seen so much growth so quickly as the agorist community has. Sam Konkin died in 2004, and since that time we've seen Uber and Lyft disintermediate taxi cartels, Airbnb disintermediate hotel cartels. We've got Ross Ulbricht creating the Silk Road, the Bitcoin white paper, and a million other other altcoins, smart contracts, 3D printed guns, like that. And this is only, like I said, Sam died in 2004, so we're talking like 17 years. Yep. Karl Marx has been dead for hundreds of years, and we haven't even had like an ounce of progress. Yeah. The same thing could be said of like Adam Smith and like sort of like socialist capitalism. So it's like, I think 3D printing is just one aspect of that trend, and that trend is best understood as like decentralization and disintermediation. People looking for ways around these sort of arbitrary legacy institutions that are imposing rules on them via coercion, like the ATF and these other domestic terrorist operations. So this is sort of a workaround for people to avoid the boot on the throat by the federal government. And all the other innovations that I just mentioned they do the exact same thing.
Yeah. So let me play devil's advocate, and
Yeah.
know full well that I'm not completely disagreeing. But most people will tell you, okay, well, Biden's already talked about ghost guns and looking to stop it using regulation and whatever means necessary in order to stop that from proliferating. A lot of people who are in the liberty space, but they're not exactly on the the agorist side of the equation, so to speak. They would tell you, oh, well, that's why you need to be involved in politics, because you need to be, defensive and hold off the barbarians at the gate while you're doing these things on the other end. I mean, what would you basically say to that?
Well, I mean, they haven't done a very good job of holding the barbarians off, right? We have more gun control today than we've ever had before. So, yeah, I don't, I think obviously, I think political solutions have really dropped the ball here. They've either been powerless to stop or complicit in the tyranny that we all experience today. So,
I find it really interesting that some of the loudest voices right now in opposition of, say, 3D printed firearms are police officers, right? Like,
yeah, oh, for sure, that and the DNC. And it just goes to show you that they only attack, it's like the enemy focuses his fire on the part of your defense that he's most threatened by. So it's like when we see them, Biden administration going after 3D printing and cryptocurrency, that should be an indicator in the mind of the average libertarian that, hey, this is what they're worried about. Maybe that's where I should focus my efforts on it. Instead, they're going door to door and canvassing neighborhoods for political parties and begging the FEC for a seat at their table. It's sort of sad to see the regression, but those of us in the agorist community are doing the best we can to try to reverse the trends. But
yeah, well, so that's a really interesting point, because this is also a workaround, I guess, for that argument that would say, well, you have to play defense or whatever. And you could just say, okay, well, we'll just come up with the next thing. Like, you just have to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, and then continue to find those workarounds that, aren't subjected to the same centralized, scrutiny, regulation, reporting, things like that, right?
Right, and the other thing too is that I would caution people into necessarily thinking that we should be playing defense, because and I'm not opposed to playing defense in terms of operational security. I believe in encrypted communications and secure computing and so on and so forth. But I don't think we should be like we need a voice in Congress to debate them or I don't think our goal should not be to get onto Fox News or something like that. I don't care about those things, right? I'm interested in creating solutions and not in sort of convincing other people to be libertarians. Per Byland's got a great article on this called The Savior Complex, where he talks about libertarians who it's sort of this weird contradiction where they believe in individualism, but they're trying to force their collective beliefs on people. And it's never made any sense to me either. I've always thought that, and again, I think PorcFest, that year at PorcFest, it really sort of pushed me over the cliff, where it's well, we can debate ending the Fed, or I could just use cryptocurrency. But I could debate gun control until the cows come home. Right? Probably for the rest of my life, I can debate gun control. Get really frustrated, drive my blood pressure up, feel oppressed. Or I could just say, fuck you, I'm not abiding by your laws. I'm already free, and you're a slave driver, and you can go fuck yourself. And I'm going to make whatever gun that I want. And that's where I'm at today. So
yeah. Well, hearkening back to talking about the Anarchist Handbook and some of these anarchists that in their day, like us looking, if we looked at them in the present day, we would think they were, completely different people than they actually were back when they were saying these things. But someone like a Max Stirner, Jose Galasan, and Magnus Panvidia just put out a video where they were talking about Stirner, and one of the things that popped out at me was this idea of everyone wants to try and like take their rights or whatever and be able to write them down. And Stirner comes at it from a completely different way. And I'm not saying this is the way, but I mean, like, he comes at it from this really interesting standpoint where it's like, my rights are whatever I can take and defend. And it sounds primitive at the onset of it, because now you're thinking about, Mad Max and running around and raping and killing and murdering and stuff. But truthfully, it's actually true, because if you look at the present day, all of the people that are yelling, my Second Amendment and things like that, and you're like, well, it's not up to you to like bow down to someone else to give you your rights back. You take them, and then if you defend them, like, you're allowed to have them. If not, they basically usurped your rights. I mean, that's just basically the way it goes, right?
Right, for sure. So a few things. Like, I'm not the world's biggest fan of Stirner. I think he's like overly confusing, and he's sort of cloudy and ambiguous and vague. But my big problem with Stirner, and then we'll I guess sort of the problem with Stirner is that he's like has this idea that rights are a spook, but he's like this proponent of like individualism, right? So like the only rights the only thing that the individual has are right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like only but it's only the individual has rights, in other words, to Stirner, but rights are inherently a spook. So which is it? There's this sort of like glaring contradiction that Rothbard always like poked at with Stirner that I was sort of sympathetic to. But in regards to like, you only have what rights you can defend. So there's this great little conversation between Socrates and Thrasymachus about might makes right I think it's in like the Republic or something like that. Highly recommend everybody read it. It's a short little passage. It's not, you don't have to read the whole book, but Socrates lays waste to the idea that might can make right. And I'm not going to draw out the whole Socratic argument from the Republic, but suffice it to say that I think rights are based on, I'm more of like a Hoppian in this sense. I'm a big fan of argumentation ethics and Rothbardian homesteading theory and stuff like that. So, politicians have nuclear bombs, and they could drop a bomb on New York City. But that doesn't mean that the people of New York City don't have the right to freedom of speech. It's being oppressed and taken from them. They still have that right. It's just being taken from them. So, I'm sort of sympathetic to a lot of Stirner's stuff, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm almost a pure Rothbardian, except for my Konkinian diversions.
Yeah, what's also interesting about him is, again, like, time and space context. Someone who is so close to Marx and that kind of thinking, right, and taking a complete far left turn from what they were doing there. What's also interesting, talking about 3D printing, it also makes me think, I wonder if you've ever had this kind of like thought, or it just made me think of like, socialists or communists talking about, the means of production, and be like, well, you have 3D printing. It is the ultimate means of production, right? Like,
yeah. In fact, I think there was a meme like that. I don't know if I made it or somebody else did, like a while ago, that's been floating around for years. It was like, seize the means of production. It was like, okay, comrade. And like, it was a guy 3D printing. And it was like, you can't get a better example of, and that's, again, Agorist class theory, right? It just goes to, it's almost like a validation of Agorist class theory. So it's like, Marx has this ridiculous class theory based on exploitation, or exploitation of the worker, whereas Agorist class theory focuses on exploitation by politicians and political parasites. But like, here you go. Like, we don't disagree on all of it, right? We do believe in seizing the means of production. We just believe in doing it for the individual, not the collective, and that's really the main difference.
Yeah, no, that's one of the first things that actually came to my mind was, you know, that breakdown of, okay, where you get to, which also makes me think of how tons of people just may have like misread people throughout history, right? Like these great
Oh, for
thinkers,
sure.
you know, like
Yeah.
they were like, oh, well, you know, seize the means of production, and then these people were like, all right, you know, bring the army in, and like
Right.
I can just imagine Marx being like, no, like, you know.
Well, there's a lot of tension between Marx and like Bakunin, right? And I think
Yep.
if I remember correctly, that was one of the selections of the Anarchist Handbook was from Bakunin criticizing Marx. I think Malice included that. I could be wrong, but Bakunin was sort of like Marx was like a state communist, right? Like, and Bakunin had this ridiculous idea of anarcho-communism, which is, you know, they're both insane, but there was like this tension between them, and it was like, you know, who was going to win. So obviously now we know it's all violence and coercion, but
Yeah.
you know.
No, that was I that's always the thought in my mind, and sometimes it's complete lunacy because I'm sitting there thinking about, you know, these great thinkers and be like, man, like if there was a, like, I don't necessarily believe in heaven or anything like that, but you know, if they could look down and be like, man, those morons didn't listen to what I said, you know. Right,
Oh,
but
forget it. Yeah. I mean, could you
yeah.
imagine, like, sometimes I wonder that as well. Like, imagine, like, if Rothbard or Konkin could, like, imagine if, like, if like, these guys were around to see where we are today, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely something that comes to my mind. But where do you see the direction of the regulation? Where do you think they're going to attack it from?
Oh, they're just starting with the regulation. And I'm not, and, you know, everything that I'm saying applies to all areas of agorism, not just 3D printing, but cryptocurrency, growing your own food, all of it. Like, it's just beginning.
Yeah.
It's only starting, and I think it's going to be a massive wave. The first thing I think is, well, they're already talking about ghost guns and so on and so forth. So they're going to want, I believe they want like everything to be serialized. They want basically everything to have a serial number on it nowadays, which obviously that's why we have the 3D printers, because we don't want to do that bullshit. So it's like, you know, it reminds me
do you think it's easier for them to serialize the components that people are using for these like hybrid printed firearms, or do you think it's easier for them to restrict access to the actual 3D printers themselves?
Neither.
No.
That's the whole key to disintermediation, right? Is that it can't be stopped, it can't be reversed. It's irreversible change. And it's like Cody said in the interview that he gave. Once those files are in the public domain, that's it. The game's over. The debate has officially ended. We are no longer discussing this.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really accurate here. Like, I've seen people 3D print 3D printers using a 3D printed pen. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about that, in other words, you just have a hot piece of metal and plastic. That's it. That's all you need. You can't regulate that. So there's no stopping that. If you can, like I said, I'm going to say it one more time for everybody. They 3D printed a 3D printer with a 3D printing pen. That's not, you can't regulate that. That's not possible. So
yeah. No, that is that's the you know, the inmate making a tool on the inside of the cell. Like, you know,
right.
As long as there is a will and there is some means of being able to fight for your own, you know, freedom and liberty, it's going to happen somewhere, you know.
Right. And if we can figure out ways to disintermediate them, to go around them completely in an irreversible fashion, that's how we win. That's how we win. And that's why I think it's so important that people get into 3D printing, cryptocurrency, aquaponics, homesteading, all sorts of things like this. And, you know, it's a way to guarantee your rights. That's the difference between agorism and political solutions, is that in politics, you have to wait and hope and wait and hope and pray. But in agorism, once you realize that you're free, you are free. And that's it. Yeah. Once you have a 3D printer and you have a roll of PLA plus or whatever, your right to bear arms has been secured, right? Yeah. It cannot be taken away from you no matter what. Once you have Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash in your wallet or Ethereum, whatever, your value cannot be siphoned off by the state. And that's the key to agorism right there.
Yeah. Let me ask you really quickly about this isn't supposed to be, the idea of the show, but you had mentioned aquaponics and um, something that I am trying to push with this show kind of going in a different direction is giving people actionable things that they can learn and practice in order to be able to separate themselves. And so whether it be aquaponics or like permaculture or even just having like your own like home garden,
Yeah.
um, that aspect of food security is huge, right? Like we're seeing it play out in real time with Cuba right now, right? Like there's a handful of things that are the like Maslow's hierarchy of needs base that you have to secure. It is housing, food, water, and protection. Those are the four things, right? And so, what really got you into aquaponics as a solution? Is it the fact that it can be done kind of like compactly with a high yield? Is that basically what you were looking at?
More or less, yeah. Again, it's funny. It's at that exact same Pork Fest where I learned 3D printing. There was another seminar on aquaponics where I fell down that road as well. But yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. You can produce a high volume of food with very little input, or minimum input, I should say. I've since learned that there's different things you should and shouldn't be doing in terms of aquaponics. There's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. But if you think about it, one of the state's biggest tactics against rebellious populations has been to starve them out, right? That's I mean, go back to Vicksburg, right? The siege of Vicksburg, when the Confederates were trying to hold off the Northern troops. What did they do? They starved them out. What did Churchill do to the Germans, right? He starved them out. So we know that the state, they did it to the Indians, right? The Native Americans. So we know that this is a common tool that they have. So let's protect against that. And I think for a lot of people who don't have like a huge access to land, or they're not on a farm or something like that, or they can't have livestock or grazing animals, aquaponics is a good solution. Again, I've learned a lot. I think indoor aquaponics is much more difficult than outdoor aquaponics. There's all sorts of tips and tricks that get into it, and also you're right. I think permaculture is another big one, or just having a homegrown garden, having a little chicken coop, anything you could do, even like buying like those Mylar bags of like stored food. I don't have them, but I've heard people who have had success storing food with them. Anything you could do to promote food security is absolutely key. That's why I tell people my mantra is, when they ask me, how do I get involved in agorism? I say, grow your own food, become your own bank, and get a 3D printer. If you can do those three things, you're better off than 99% of the population.
Oh yeah, and I come to think of, I think again, like you said, if you know you're free, right, or if you know that you have the freedom to do something just because you are, right, like that's the ultimate idea of freedom. It's not that you have to wait, right, like, and I come to think of people that spend time on lines at like the welfare office, like people that spend time on lines to get their WIC or their food stamp benefits and things like that. I mean, some of that has become more digitized and I'll use air quotes again, efficient, right? But that being said, that time spent doing some of these things that we're talking about would probably result in a higher quality of life, and they would end up detaching themselves from essentially a system that's effectively a leech, like on their lives, as well as everyone else who essentially is forming the foundation of that like support mechanism.
For sure. For sure. And I think if we can, and that's the ultimate goal, is to get 3D printers into the hands of those people. Right. I said often, I want to see a 3D printer in every workshop and on every desk in America. And that's when that day comes, that's when we're going to see people will stop talking about gun control and all sorts of stupid stuff. But that not only will disintermediate the firearms manufacturing industry, but it will disintermediate the entire manufacturing industry, because now the average person can have a sort of a Walmart in their basement, right? So, instead of going to a retail store and plucking something off the shelf, now you just go to that retail store's website, you download the file, and then in an hour or half hour, you walk down to your basement, and that item is waiting for you in your 3D printer. That's the ultimate goal here. in terms of like welfare, you know, the state's dependence, being into 3D printers right now. I think at this point, I'm just trying to get libertarians and ANCAPs into it.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to convert the people who are already in the liberty movement to the agorist equation. But once we get those everyday people, like you're saying, then we'll be straight at that point.
Yeah, and that was actually a big piece of, you know, the first generation, so to speak, of this kind of like, you know, path for myself was the finding of the path. Like I didn't even know what path to walk down, right? So like that was the first part. The second part was the realization. I was like, you know what? Who the fuck am I to tell other people how like they should live their life, or even what legislation, you know, should be passed if I myself am not living, you know, free.
Right.
Like if I myself don't have the balls to like thumb my nose at the system and live in such a way where I'm telling others that they should be, you know, eventually happy to live that way, right? And it's also one of those aspects where I would love to hear your thought process on this. Like, look, hierarchy happens, right? Like, I mean, if you own a business and you have employees, I mean, it's basically hierarchy, right? But weak people typically end up with weak leaders, right? And so even when it is voluntary association in terms of that hierarchy, if you're not like a strong person in terms of your ability to stand on your own 2 feet, I mean, you're going to end up with a grifter, or you're going to end up with someone who is just, you know, not, I mean, like, it's like, you know, it's like any of the sayings, right? Like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? Like even that level of superiority doesn't exist amongst our leadership, you know?
Right. For sure. So like the issue of hierarchy and anarchist thought is a super interesting topic. This is like something that they've been discussing in anarchist literature for, you know, forever.
Yeah.
And we agorists usually come down on the side of anti-hierarchy, which is the NCAPs don't like that too much.
Yep.
But I think that's because they misunderstand a lot of the stuff that Konkin was getting at. And I think Per Byland has done a good job clarifying it. So it's like, we're not opposed to natural hierarchies, right? We're not opposed to the natural voluntary formation of hierarchies, but we believe that in the agora, in a free society that's not dominated by statists in any way whatsoever, there would be much less hierarchy. Things would be much more society would be much more horizontal. And I actually have a meme today that I posted just recently that was like something like I don't know if you've seen like the Tanky of the Lake meme, but it's like Tanky of the Lake, what is your wisdom? And it's like billionaires are only billionaires because they know that the state will, or no, billionaires don't support libertarianism because they know that they need the state to prop them up, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But that's completely true. And I think that without the state holding up a lot of these corporations, they would be knocked down, and you would have a much more competitive market. Think about if Amazon didn't rely on subsidies, right? The retail market would be much more decentralized, and you have a much more competition, and prices might be lower. I mean, we don't know. Who knows? Maybe Jeff Bezos can dominate on a natural monopoly, but we don't know that because he's so heavily subsidized. And it's not just Bezos. I don't want to just pick on Amazon, but all these corporations are in bed with the state, and they're all guilty of it. And that's why, and not to just, I know I'm all over the place right now, but like Konkin spoke about opposing corporations in favor of joint stock companies, because a corporation is based on a state charter, whereas a joint stock company is based on the voluntary consent of the shareholders.
And anyone who gets into like the idea of sovereignty and stuff, that also makes sense, right? Because you're not now dealing with some kind of like artificial fiction that now gets made. You're dealing with a true collective of individuals that are banding together. And, you know, I completely agree with that. And I completely agree with the idea that, you know, like, I'm just starting to read Hoppe. So, and everything I have heard of him makes me think that I'm going to jive with it, but, you know, I don't want to be that person who, you know, basically hears a couple of sound bites or quotes and says like, yeah, like I'm a Hoppian.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, the idea of collective, it's not necessarily that agorists or anarchists or anyone on the liberty side are necessarily anti collectives, right? Like it's that collective needs to be a voluntary collective. It has to be one where there's no coercion. There has to be one that someone feels like,
Exactly.
look, they want to pick up and leave. Go ahead, have fun. Like there's nothing that's gonna keep you here against your will. And so that really appeals to me. The idea that
It's not the collective that we oppose, right? It's
Yeah.
collectivism. It's the mindset that the best way to promote society is by focusing on the development of the collective rather than the development of the individual. As libertarians and agorists, we believe the latter. That doesn't mean that we don't believe that there are groups or sets of people that naturally form in society, right? There are baseball players, right? We're not all race car drivers, right? There are natural sorts of there's differences between us that are going to see themselves play out in everyday life, and to deny it is just sort of silly.
Oh yeah, yeah, and also, I don't know if you've been following it, but there's also this, I brought up Pete earlier when you first hopped on, but Pete's been going through this a little bit, this kind of like post-libertarian idea. There's also, some folks talking about, kind of like the religious aspect of political thought or ideology and things like that. I don't necessarily know if I'm completely on their level with a lot of what they're saying, but there are a couple of things that ring true. Like there are some people still that would choose to be, there's betas, right? Like there are certain people that will choose to be part of a collective and not necessarily like, the master of their own domain, so to speak.
For sure.
But there needs to be a conscious decision on that part, on that person. I think we have a ton of people that are running around that are betas that want to call the shots right now. And you're like, and they use politics as that medium, right?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. And you're 100% right. I couldn't agree with that more. And, why would you want to let people like that, to determine how much of your paycheck you get to keep, or if you can defend yourself, or just, it's sort of silly to me that we sort of defer to that, to like you said, to these betas or these losers, right? So I don't know, it's sort of silly to me, but I have a sort of unique take on like the sort of intersection of religion and politics. I really do believe that agorism is like it's very spiritual for me. Like it's very much like a religious thing for me, because I think that at the end of the day, what we call the market is sort of like a euphemism for God. And I think like not to get too like deep and philosophical, but it seems to me like everything that exists in nature, everything that's true, right? The state of affairs, right? Just the way things are is just another word for the economy or the market. Yeah. And I think, I can make a sort of complex argument, but, I don't know if you want to get deep into the philosophical tradition.
Well, it's the balance, right? Like, I think that's what everyone... So there's two things that I think a lot of people who are... I would not consider myself religious anymore. I was raised religious. I was raised Baptist. For a time, I would have called myself atheist until I truly kind of dug into what that meant, and I wasn't really on board with that. I would consider myself more spiritual now. But I think there's two reasons why people take on some kind of religious belief or spirituality or things like that. It's to, one, find balance, and to, two, fill in the gaps, right? So like anything that they don't understand, a lot of times they use, a religious dogma to fill in that gap for them. And then the other one is just to find that balance, right? Like if they feel like they're out of balance, it's something that kind of helps right the ship or hold them in a certain level of kind of like
and that's yeah, no doubt. And that's been the case throughout history, right? We've seen that play out over and over again, where like that's, I mean, how many figures from history can we apply that to, who have sort of used religion as a sort of, I don't know what's going on here, it must some sort of spooky action, it must be God or the devil at play. That's half of medieval history right there. So it's no different today. People do it to this very day, and I think
and I can see that in the market, right? Like the market has not necessarily this invisible hand, but it just has this inherent mechanism for finding balance, right? Like and for filling in the gaps.
if you think about it, the market is everything that's good, right? It's everything that's positive, and politics is everything that's bad and negative. And you sort of have this sort of dichotomy. That's where like it sort of becomes spiritual for me in the sense that like the market is sort of godlike, and the state is sort of like satanic, and I don't even I use the term satanic in like the term of like this contemporary monotheism, but I'm not sort of not necessarily subscribed to any of those religions, but I'm just using it sort of, you know, as a catch-all phrase here. But I think, you know, there's a very deep road to go down. I talked with Jeffrey Tucker about this briefly at the end of an episode I did with him of the Agora called Crypto Economics, if anybody wants to go down that road a little bit. Also at the beginning of a show called WTF is Agorism on the Agora on my SoundCloud, like the very first 5 minutes, I like do a deep dive into like all of that stuff. But, you know, that being said, I should say that a lot of the current discussion on culture and stuff like that, I'm not really down with. I think a lot of libertarians get it wrong. I think that it's not the case that culture affects politics. I think politics affects culture. I think I'm probably in the minority there. But I think if once a proper understanding of Bombay work and hop will force you into that conclusion. Once you understand time preference and how the central bank sort of creates or induces an artificially high time preference on people, and that how that sort of leads to cultural degeneration, you sort of it's the conclusion is sort of inescapable.
Yeah, that is an interesting dynamic where even, I mean, you've caught me in it. I fall to the euphemism of saying, you know, thinking that politics is downstream from culture, but that's only in a specific setting, and it's the setting where you're starting from zero, right? Like when you start from zero, like, so, you know, the day after the revolution is done, right? Like there's an argument to say that politics is downstream from culture, because culture is essentially what is, you know, kind of forming what the future looks like. But at some point in time, they cross, and it now becomes, you know, culture is maybe it's the dam, right? Like culture might actually be the you know, kind of immunizing effect until politics ends up overpowering it. I don't know. Like I have to look into that more, but yeah, I can see what you're talking about, because the idea that, you know, culture is not affected by, say, central banking or, you know, some of the authoritarian top-down stuff that we have is untrue. Like it has a direct effect on people's consumption habits and
For sure.
patterns. You know, yeah.
Also, a lot of culture. If you look at it historically, a lot of culture is a response to the state. So it's like, especially in like Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, the Soviet bloc, you see this a lot. Like a lot of the cultural habits are a result of them not having a certain thing that they have to sort of develop this workaround for. And you see foods develop this way, like they didn't have such and stuff. So like now this culture, you know, a certain food is a part of it, of some ethnicity, because they lacked a certain resource at one particular time. There's all sorts of things like that. But
that's actually so one of the other things that I'm reading right now, I'm like digging through my pile of books here, but James C. Scott.
Oh,
James
yeah.
C. Scott is the one I'm also reading.
Yes.
You know, the idea of,
he's the man.
And that really kind of points to what you're talking about is, you know, what you plant is affected by whether or not you want to be taxed, or when, you know, government officials are going to come by and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that book you held up, I recommend it to everybody, because it does a great job showing it. Also, Against the Grain is another one.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever read that one, but that's...
I love the argument he makes where he was like, we didn't domesticate animals. He basically says,
we didn't domesticate wheat or grain. They domesticated us.
It domesticated us, yeah, because we then had to form our own life around, you know, that plant grow harvest cycle.
Yeah, and what does he say? He says something like, if you like base like successive life forms on how many copies of DNA helixes have been produced, we're like losing, and like grain and grass is like kicking our butt. And I think it's sort of mind blowing. It's almost like reading Walter Block. It's like when like they just hit you with one of those arguments that's just like
Yeah.
just
Well,
explodes your head, you know.
and it's that he as well as a number of the other people that we've mentioned, they have this habit of not just assuming the world is one way, right? So everyone kind of sees
Yes.
things from one perspective, and they're like, wait a minute, let me take it. Like everyone's like, oh well, we cultivate grain and we are the master of of agrarian business, right? And then James C. Scott's like, you know what if I was grain, right? Like, would I feel like I was the master, or would I feel like I was the servant? Like it's
And
that
like,
fantastic perspective.
just to sort of tie this back into the original discussion, like think about what I mean, and if anybody out there who hasn't, maybe they haven't read Scott, so they don't know what we're talking about. I don't want to lose them, so just
Yeah.
real quick, and I'll probably lose my original train of thought. But James C. Scott was like, he had the idea that governments only formed around grain societies because it was easier to apportion taxation this way. So you could say, Matt has X amount of wheat, so this is the amount of taxes that are due. And sort of, as Scott shows in the book, civilizations based around coastal estuaries that weren't dependent on grains were the last to see the formation of states and governments,
Yep.
which is just, I mean, it's such a brilliant and obvious historical fact, but it's just like sitting out there in your face and you don't even realize it. But my point here is that those people were able to be free for so long because they were self-sustainable, right?
Yep.
And that's what we're talking about with 3D printing and agorism and becoming your own bank and growing your own food and aquaponics. It's about being self-sustainable and not being dependent on them for anything. And that's we're sort of, I think Scott talks about the Calusa Indians. Maybe think that was down here in Florida, I believe. I could be wrong. Some geography nerd will quote me and be wrong, but we're sort of the Calusa Indians of the present day, the Agorists, because we're the ones who are self-dependent. We're this sort of isolated civilization holding out against the politicians.
Yeah, and you see those echoes throughout time too. So, looking at say like something like World War II. Okay, first of all wars are bankers' wars. So just remember
For
that.
sure.
But, so looking at something like World War II and just the interviews that were done with the leadership over there in Japan and be like, well, we didn't invade the United States because there was basically a sniper sitting behind every single blade of grass, and it was because we had a country full of subsistence hunters and people that knew how to live off the grid if they did. I mean, like if a country during that day and age snapped its fingers and like disrupted our supply chain, there were still a lot of people that would have been able to persist, right? Same thing happens today, and that shit's catastrophic, right? Like, because just almost no one comparatively to that era is able to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. And so like you have those echoes throughout history,
No doubt, but and that's 100% true. But look at like the Agorist, like Nicole Sauce from the Holler Homestead, or Shane Radliff from the Free Republic of Pasnia.
Yep.
These agorists, these homesteading agorists, and there's many others out there. There's a whole contingency of agorists who are into homesteading. They won't even know. They won't even know that there's an attack, right? They don't even, like, to them, it's not even a thing.
Yeah.
So it's like again, you have to like insulate yourself from politics, and the way to do that is through self-sustainability and agorism.
Well, that was also some of James C. Scott's point too. The areas where people live to escape the state are areas where like they're in the hills, right? Like they're at higher elevation and things like that. So like when the nukes go off, they're like, "What was that?"
Right.
Like,
dude, look at me. I'm a good example. I'm not in the hills, but I definitely moved closer to a rural area, right? I was 10, 15 minutes from New York City, and now I'm in Florida. I'm moving to Sarasota in a couple of weeks, which is sort of like a much more rural location, but that's what you have to do nowadays. And I think in my opinion, things are going to get really bad really quick. So I think everybody has to sort of do what they can to be prepared. And this is sort of one of the steps that I'm taking.
Yeah. And I'm also going to try and build in people that are doing some of these things in an urban setting. I had Jeremiah on And we talked about, becoming the gray man and stuff like that. And he
Yes,
made
the
really good
key.
points. Being an agorist in an urban setting or in a city center is to a certain extent easier, right? Because there's more of an ability to engage in gray and black markets and things like that,
For
right?
sure.
But so yeah, that's also something I want to involve is people that are growing food in an urban setting and things
Yeah,
like that.
well, that's and that's just to touch on that. That's an important point that I've made as well. And I think you know getting up and leaving, right, like I did, is if you can move from a place with 80% income tax to a place with 0% income tax, you should do that. If you can, do it. But that's not, you're not fighting the government. You're not helping bring about the downfall of the state. The only way to do that is through counter economics. And Jeremiah's 100% right. There is much more black and gray market opportunities in places where where there's a greater amount of regulation. So, that's no doubt true. Now, in terms of like urban
Sounds like if you
agorism,
had your druthers, you would move away.
yeah, for sure, yes, and like I said, you should if you can, right? If you can. Now, in terms of like urban agorism, especially growing your own food in an urban setting, and we've covered this on the New Libertarian. Alex Utopian has covered this. Curtis Stone has a whole book on this. I think it's called like urban farming or something like that. He's known as Curtis Stone, the urban farmer.
Yep.
And one of the things Curtis taught me is that if you are in a super, super highly urban area, right, one possibility that you could do is to maybe pool your resources together with other people and get a little plot of land and create like a community garden or a co-op or something like that.
Yep.
I think that is a wonderful idea. Like aquaponics is great, but you need a lot of room for it, especially outdoors. There's others, you can grow weed in your closet and that's even more profitable. That's a whole other story. But yeah, I mean, there's no shortage. Alex Utopian, I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's based in Oslo. Yeah. He turned his entire apartment into like a friggin' jungle like a couple of years ago. I mean, the pictures, I don't know if they're on the Utopian blog or the New Libertarian, but like he had friggin' container plants everywhere, tomatoes hanging off of his vines or hanging off his balcony. He was growing tobacco and drying them out and shipping tobacco out, like untaxed and unlicensed. So there's all sorts of counter economic opportunities in regards to like urban farming.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Also Carl Hess, right, in community technology. Carl Hess does a great job going through in the Adams Morgan neighborhood. He set up a whole aquaponics, major, super large scale. Was able to feed the entire neighborhood in a way that bypassed all local regulation, all state regulation. So again, that just goes to show you the power of this type of counter economics.
Oh yeah, and in areas where there's a lot of like blight and stuff like that, where you have a lot of these abandoned buildings and whatnot, whether they're warehouses. I mean, there's square footage that you could reclaim, and so it could be an aquaponic facility. It could be a vertical gardening facility, right? There's even what I haven't seen a lot on, and I haven't done much research recently, was these climate controlled grow boxes. Have you seen these, where they can essentially approximate the climate of an area in the world? And so, say you live in somewhere that has a very a short growing season, but you want to grow something like, whatever, kiwis or something like that. They actually create a computer system that can acclimatize a certain, cubic area to the actual grow environment of that other part of the country or the other part of the world that you want to grow that produce.
Okay, that's pretty cool. You can do that by controlling like the amount of UV light and the light cycles and stuff like that. But a computerized system sounds a hell of a lot easier than trying to do it manually and screwing it up or something like that.
Yeah, but it's there's so many of those opportunities out there. I think the key is, and you and I run into this all the time. Someone's like, but the, whatever, and I can't stand this. And you're like, well, then fucking leave. Like, go do something. Like,
right.
I think a lot of people are just resigned to, like, complain, and then they'll be like, well, I'll just vote harder next time, and maybe I'll maybe I'll be
Yeah,
able to
for
live
sure. I
live
know.
in
And
her.
that obviously, that has a great history of working out really
Yeah.
well. But, just going back to what you said about like reclaiming like these warehouses in urban areas, right?
Mm.
Right by where you are, right in New Jersey, in Newark, they have what the heck is the name of it? I forget the name now, but it's like this. It's one of the world's largest aeroponic farms. So aeroponics is like the roots sort of just hang in the air, and they're sort of they receive nutrients through like mist or something like that.
Mhm.
And people create these like really cool aeroponic towers with cups, and then the plants and the roots are hanging out, and you can buy these misters from Home Depot. It's very cool stuff.
Yeah.
You can do it indoors and stuff, but right in Newark is one of the largest facilities, and I think they did it in like a reclaimed warehouse. So it's like you wouldn't think in Newark, New Jersey, of all places, they have like a huge farm, but they do. And if they can do it there, then obviously they can do it anywhere,
Oh yeah, yeah, most definitely. So, well, look, I want to be respectful of your time. I don't want to keep you too long. We could probably sit here and talk all night, but let me give you whiplash and go back to the original, subject of the actual episode. What advice? Where would you send someone who is completely green about 3D printing, and they need to learn it from the ground up? Where would you send them for equipment, first of all, and then second of all, that first line, the 101 education in order to get them started?
Yeah. So obviously, number one, 3dprintergobird.com. That's your top resource. I've got the blog. We've got all of the printers there are selected. I don't want to get myself in trouble, so let me phrase this properly. All of the printers there are specifically chosen for libertarian purposes. They will all work for what you need them to do. But look, a great guide on this. There's two resources I want to point you to. Number one, I did an episode called "So You Got a 3D Printer" with Control Pew and Ivan the Troll. I had some really great feedback about that, where we sort of lay out like. I say to these guys, all right, so you have a 3D printer just arrived on your doorstep. What's the next step? And they walk you like all the way through to like printing an FGC9 basically. So check out that episode. That's on my SoundCloud. You can just find me at Sal Mayweather or something like that, Sally Mayweather. Also, Control Pew has the guide, which is another excellent resource. I think it's like guide.controlpew or theguide.controlpew, something like that. But
Yep.
he sort of lays it all out in like step 1, step 2, step 3. Another great resource. And if you use those affiliate links, you can help him out too. So if you have any questions, you can also obviously shoot me an email. 3dprintergobird@gmail.com. I can't answer questions directly related to like firearms and stuff like that because ATF will come and I'll die, and that one then the memes end, so we can't have that.
Yes.
So so that's it.
We can't shut off the flow of memes. That would be,
Right,
that would be
yeah,
tragic.
I know. I've been suspended a few times, so I'm not trying to push it too far.
Yeah, and I don't want to undercut him, but I potentially I'll have Control Pew on next week, and he actually has a course through Renegade University that you could take, and I think it takes you through the whole thing start to finish. Like buy this package of stuff, and he shows it on Amazon, but definitely go to 3dprinter.com. GoBird.com. So,
and like I said, the whole key is you can pay with by avoiding the KYC payment platform. That's the whole reason that the site exists. So if you're interested in counter economic purposes, you can go that way. That doesn't mean that the transaction is completely private. Obviously, disclaimer: you need to use VPN and Tor and stuff like that. But yeah, use a coin mixer. But
that's going to be another episode, believe me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I was about to ask you if I could pay with Monero off of my cold storage, but that's going to be another episode entirely.
Yeah, for sure.
But no, look, Sal, I appreciate it, for coming back and
dude, thank you for having me, man. Anytime you want to do it.
Yeah, look, if anything else comes to mind in terms of, look, we're looking to do practical, like, do this in order to, and again, the goal being like, if you want to detach from, you know, the centralized life, or if you just want like the ability to and not necessarily like exercise it. I'm not going to force you in that direction, but, you know, like I said, you know, you have to build those skills so that you actually have leverage, so that if the system does try and dick you over, you can be like, well, forget, I'll just go off and do my own thing. So, you know.
Can I just tell you, and I won't keep you too long, but just
Sure.
that's the sort of content we need. Too many libertarian podcasts nowadays, and I don't want to get in trouble here, but a lot of them are just a philosophical circle jerk about like the non-aggression principle. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like how about we discuss solutions?
And, you know,
It's like,
better. And like,
can we talk about like the way out rather than, you know, the nonsensical like the minutia that gets caught in the liberty community? So I really admire what you're doing, and I hope to see more people follow that lead.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'll definitely have to get you on to talk about, you know, some OPSEC stuff and some crypto.
Absolutely.
To help people from that angle, because I know there's a lot of people that want to get into it, and it's like 3D printing. They're afraid to, or they think they'll break something, you know. So,
Right. Exactly.
yeah, all right. Well, have a good evening. Enjoy your evening, and look, I'm looking forward to having you on again in the future. So I appreciate it a lot, Sal. Thanks.
Thank you, man.
Have a good one.
You too.